Okay, here. Make sure I get the right microphone. My name is Darrell Boness, and I'm chairman of the Marine Mammal Commission. And let me first thank Danny Akaka for his opening here. Very much appreciate it. Danny is indirectly a member related to the federal family through his father, the former Senator Akaka. Francis, thank you very much. And with that, I will open the meeting officially. I'd like to welcome everyone to our 2019 annual meeting. As many of you who have been to meetings may know, we try to rotate where we hold our meetings around the country and coastal regions. So each year we select a region based on issues, or sometimes it's simply the amount of time since we've been to a region. And it turns out the last meeting for the commission in Hawaii was in 2009, so it was definitely high time we come here again. And of course, there's no shortage of marine mammal issues for us to be discussing over the next 3 days. With that, I'll give you a brief history. Sorry, I have trouble because I have a soft voice, so I have to get close, but then I get too close. So I'd like to give you just a brief history of the Commission's involvement in Hawaiian issues. And you heard a little bit at the opening here. Lloyd Lowery, who has been involved in Hawaiian issues and interested in Hawaiian issues despite being in Alaska for many years, has a long history of being involved in Hawaiian monk seal matters and in later years other issues. I was fortunate in the mid-1980s to actually be able to do research on Hawaiian monk seal, so I have some history that even precedes my time involved with the Commission. The Commission's early involvement in Hawaii was focused almost entirely on Hawaiian monk seals. And with that, before I go any further, let me just acknowledge David Lace is in the audience here somewhere. I'm scanning, don't see him, but okay, there he is over there. So I'm doing this with a little hesitation because David will catch anything I say incorrectly, since the Commission's involvement in Hawaii was pretty much David laced for a long time. So David, I'd just like to say thank you, and I'm glad you could be here. David is now retired from the Commission, but he can't quit. So he's here with us today. So the Commission recognized the issue of monk seal decline, and from 1977 to 1981 funded a husband-wife couple, Brian and Patricia Johnson, who did some of the first critically important research on Laysan and French frigate shoals, which kind of served as the stepping off point for further involvement by the Commission. And one of the things that became apparent is that there simply was inadequate funding to develop a proper research program and a management plan for Hawaiian monk seal. So one of the first things the Commission did was spend a lot of time working with congressional offices to try and obtain additional funding. So from 1981 to 1983, the Commission was successful in either getting funding that came to the Commission and was passed through to the National Marine Fisheries Service and the monk seal program, or additional money that went to the monk seal program itself. So following on that additional funding and development of the National Marine Fisheries Service program, the Commission stayed closely involved by doing a quite regular review of the monk seal recovery program. So, in fact, the Commission did a review in probably sometimes to the irritation of the National Marine Fisheries Service. They did one in 1987, 89, 91, 95, and 2002. I think if I were running a research program and had that kind of intensive review of what I was doing, I'd find it hard to do. But in fact, it was a good arrangement and opportunity for feedback back and forth to make headway in terms of mitigating issues with Hawaiian monk seals. And in most recent years, the perhaps big investment from the Commission, and this was done through Commissioner Francis Gullen, was working with NMFS to develop the monk seal hospital, Keikaiola. Forgive me if I don't pronounce that correctly. So also in more recent years, in 2009, the Commission, especially at the urging of Robin Baird, became more involved in false killer whale issues, and the Commission supported actions by NMFS to list the main Hawaiian Islands insular population of false killer whales as endangered under the ESA, and an action that was ultimately completed in 2012. And then the Commission has served as a member of the false killer whale take reduction team since its inception in February of 2010. The Commission also became involved and engaged in spinner dolphin swim with, and even before our efforts on the spinner whales, spinner dolphins in Hawaii, the Commission has had a longer standing interest in swim with programs and contracted with Amy Samuels to do a literature review and a report that came out in 2000. So the other thing with respect to spinner dolphins, the Commission funded some research in the late 2000s to help fill gaps in information that's critical to the management of spinner dolphins. This was funding that went to the spinner dolphin acoustics, population parameters, and human impacts research projects, or SAPPHIRE. Once again, David Lace comes into the picture with a tremendous effort being pushed by David on dealing with marine debris issues. Again, a lot of impact on Hawaiian monk seals, and the Commission was a co-convener of two conferences on marine debris, one in 1984 and one in 1989, both of them held in Honolulu. And then, of course, in cooperation with many other federal agencies and NGOs and so forth, the Commission has been involved in organizing, funding, and convening a variety of workshops. One that sticks in my mind because Lloyd Lowery led this particular workshop was in 2002, and I think it might have been on Kauai, if I recall correctly. It was a workshop to help develop best practices for Hawaiian monk seal management in the main Hawaiian Islands, given the frequent human interactions that occurred as a result of their increase in the main Hawaiian Islands. The Commission also then has supported the development of and revisions to management plans for protected areas, including Midway Island, National Wildlife Refuge, James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge on Oahu, the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, the National Northwest Hawaiian Islands Coral Reef Ecosystem Reserve, and the Papahanaumokuakea National Monument. So our past annual meetings in Hawaii, maybe some earlier than I have, but certainly from 1987 we met here, 1990 we met here, 2004 we actually met in Kona. Also had an event hosted by Kathy and Lloyd at that meeting, and now we're here again after 10 years. So with that, let me segue into our current meeting today. So our last two meetings, one in Seattle and the one before that in the Northeast, we focused on just a few topics. In fact, in both of those meetings, we had two issues or species that we wanted to focus on. So in Seattle, we focused on southern resident killer whales and an issue of recovering pinniped populations. In the Northeast, we focused on gray seals, which was part of that increasing pinniped population problem, and also then the North Atlantic right whale, another critically endangered species. So this year, we are going back to kind of a broader approach. In our earlier annual meetings, the Commission tried to cover virtually every issue and species that we focused on, and sometimes these led to meetings that started at 8 in the morning and ended at 8 in the evening. We no longer have that stamina, so we're a little more focused in what we do, but we think we have the key issues as topics over the next 3 days. We will follow the same pattern that we've done in the last 3 to 4 annual meetings, where we have a moderator and presentations followed by a question and answer period with a panel. So we hope to have lots of involvement. We understand that with this system, there's a limited number of presentations we can have, and there are probably a lot more people here who would like to present their views and information than we've been able to give. So our staff talked with and met with a lot of local people to help develop who would be the appropriate people giving presentations during the sessions. For those who are not sitting on a panel but have thoughts and ideas, comments they want to make, there will be opportunities at the end of each panel discussion for either questions or brief statements to be made. We will likely give our community of scientific advisors and our commissioners the first opportunity for questions and statements, but then we'll open it up to the audience. At the end of each day, we will have a half-hour session where we will take input from the audience. And then at the end of the 3 days, we will have, I believe, an hour-long session where there may be opportunity as well. You can also, during a break time, if you haven't had a chance to say something you'd like to, catch an appropriate commissioner or committee of scientific advisors or staff person and have a conversation and let them know. It will get passed on. So we use these meetings to develop our thoughts on going forward dealing with these issues. So we just really encourage and hope we get a lot of input from everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter to say a few more words about what the Commission has been up to. Thank you.
Thanks, and welcome everybody. I'm Peter Thomas, the Executive Director of the Marine Mammal Commission. My first annual meeting with the Commission was here in Hawaii in 2009. So I can say I have 10 years of Hawaiian experience, but I'm really looking to all of you to tell us as a commission and scientific advisors about Hawaii today. I don't have that background to tell you all the ins and outs, all the skeletons and closets, all the worries and everything that you all have about different issues. So really exciting to be here and hear where we are today. I think I'll wait. At the end, I'm going to have all the commissioners and scientific advisors and staff get up and introduce themselves quickly, but we'll wait a moment to do that. And remind me if I don't do it, okay? Because I could forget. I want to give you a little bit of a perspective. A few of you are in post-traumatic stress syndrome because you're hearing about Washington, D.C. Well, some of us actually live there, and we can talk to you about traumatic stress syndrome in the breaks. But one of the things that has happened with the commission is that over the past several years, the administration has proposed that we be eliminated, and Congress has actually funded us, full funding the first year. This past year, we got a little bit of an increase, and for the current year, which Congress is deliberating about right now, at least the House side of Congress is considering giving us another increase, but nothing's set in stone at this point. But we're very grateful for all the support we've gotten from folks in this room, from congressional representatives, from House, Congress people, senators, and really the general public. So I wanted to start with that and just really appreciate that someone out there likes us. Another thing I want to talk about are some personnel changes. We mentioned that David is retired. We're recovering from that as well. He's recovered very well. He's carving fish and fishing and looks like 50 years younger than when he left. That's not saying much. I mean, he still looks like he's like 700 years old. But we also have new staff, and we have the three musketeers back here. We have Mara Howe, who's our new policy analyst. Mara came to us from the Fish and Wildlife Service, where she was a Knaus Fellow and then was an employee in their Legislative Affairs Office. And she has a great background here in Hawaii. So when she came on, we sent her out here immediately to do some ground truthing on some of the humpback stuff, and really thrilled to have Mara. And we've just hired Brady O'Donnell, another former Knaus Fellow. Took us a long time to settle the communications position, but we're just thrilled to have Brady. And the folks on the phone, you can thank Brady for setting up the webinar, and that's a reminder that this is a webinar. We hope people are listening. We know people in our office are listening. Shout out to them. I sound like Sarah Palin. Then the third person I want to recognize is Roxanne Carini, who came to us this year as our Knaus Fellow. And we're thrilled to have her from the University of Washington, where she just got her PhD on something to do with like the dynamics of wave action. And it's not just waves in the world, it's individual waves and how individual waves work. And so we're hoping to turn that into understanding marine mammal conservation and biology, which I think Sue is going to help with that. I won't go into great detail, but just to give you a little more on our activities in Washington, D.C., we've actually given both the sort of political issues and the marine mammal issues around the country, we've spent a lot of time up on Capitol Hill. I think we've had 48 congressional briefings with different offices over the past 18 months, really trying to the commission was formed to inform Congress. And we consider Congress one of our masters. So it's really been important not only to get up and toot our horn and say we're great, but to come in and say, all right, we just had our annual meeting in Falmouth, Massachusetts, where everyone's worried about overabundance of gray seals and the North Atlantic right whale. Well, so we've gone in repeatedly to the offices along the entire East Coast to say, okay, here's our understanding of what's happening with right whales. Here's our interpretation of what happened at the last meeting. Here's what we think the lobster fishermen are thinking, and really provide that service to Congress. And again, I thank the whole staff. Brady sort of made it his Knaus Fellowship project to understand Congress, and we really appreciate that. I won't go into, there are a number of bills that folks have been working on in the House and Senate. But then I'll just quickly, we also are working still on Alaska and Arctic issues. We're thrilled to have Vera here. We've just wrapped up or putting the final touches on a North Pacific Research Board project related to co-management in Alaska. Since some Alaska listening sessions, we've really tried to get to Alaska, be in Alaska as much as we can, working with different organizations there. Mike Tillman has played a really crucial role on the Aboriginal Subsistence Whaling Committee in the International Whaling Commission. And we're just, again, really it's tough from DC to be up in Alaska enough, but I would say if you analyzed our travel budget, it's going to be a pretty big percentage. And maybe after this meeting, we'll be in Hawaii all the time, and I'm going to be the first one who comes back. I mentioned North Atlantic right whales. There are just a number of issues. We won't go into it a great deal. We operate by both being here, listening to people, working with folks in Congress, but also writing letters concerning regulatory actions. And we have a really, really busy staff who produce over 100, 125, 130 letters a year on different regulatory actions. And these commissioners and scientific advisors review every one of those letters, and they're the ones who are sending the letter that goes out. And you can go to our website and spend days and days and days looking those over, and unfortunately the folks at National Marine Fisheries Service get a lot of them, so our apologies up front. We also have a grants program. I encourage you to go to the website and look at the both previous and ongoing requests for proposals. Last year we focused on community-driven conservation approaches to address the threats to marine mammals, and Sam Simmons and Dee Allen can talk to folks about those. And this year we have one out right now on impacts of a changing ocean on marine mammals of importance to Alaska natives, and we're in the process of reviewing a number of proposals now. So that's just a summary of where we are. I want to give you a couple logistical things, and then I want folks to introduce themselves. So the first really important is whoever is in room 4359 should come to see me because I have your room key. You can do that anonymously. You can send a representative, however you want to do it. So room 4359, we found the room key. A few logistical things. The bathrooms are out that door and around to the left. The fire exits, you can see one over there, one over there, one over there, and as you go out, you're supposed to gather in the parking lot. Lunch, I guess there are some options. There's the Holo Holo Market up in the hotel. There's a poolside bar, and then there's a shopping center, a little bit of a drive away, and Daryl has maps to help people get there. It's tried to make an hour-and-a-half lunch. It still may be tight for people. Now, the hardest thing is parking validation. If you're staying in the hotel and you have a car, you can go in and out with your room key. It's $5 a day. You tap your room key at the gate, it says. If you're not staying on the property, you have to take your parking ticket up to the front desk of the hotel and get it validated to get out. You let them know you're with the Marine Mammal Commission conference. It's a little bit of a hike, but you need the exercise. So anyway, room 4349, if you haven't figured it out, we've got your room key. So now let's just do some quick introductions. Daryl has introduced himself, but I want to really introduce my real bosses amongst Daryl and start with Michael Tillman. This is also a test of the microphone system.
No skills.
There
Anyway, good morning. I'm Mike Tillman, and just thinking back, this is almost at the time when we celebrate our 9th anniversary as commissioners. You think back. So, as Peter has mentioned, I'm has been mostly interested in Alaska issues and the effects of climate change on marine mammals and the subsistence hunts.
Hello, I'm Frances Gulland. I'm one of the 3 commissioners. I'm a veterinarian by training and worked with the Marine Mammal Centre for 25 years and just left there in February, smiling here at Jeff, who was my past boss. And it's a pleasure to be able to focus more on commission work with the commission.
We're going to have Randy Reeves go first because he's another luminary.
Yeah, right, thanks. This thing's working, right? Yes. No. I'm with you. It's not working, right? That's not my fault. Or is it?
I don't.
Robin?
You want to try ours? Ours seems
Try it again.
After all that, I'm Randy Reeves, and I live near Montreal in Canada. I was just thinking that the first contact, or one of the first things I did with the Marine Mammal Commission was in 1977 when the commission sponsored a workshop on hydrofoil ferries and humpback whales and the risk of ship strikes. And I was the rapporteur for that thing, and Ken Norris chaired it. Anyway, enough reminiscing. One thing I would like to mention, though, is that my first meetings on the scientific committee were those where the committee was chaired by Lloyd Lowry, and I got to know him well then, and since then we've worked on a number of different things together, and it was really a pleasure and a privilege to have learned from him and enjoyed his company.
I guess we'll just keep going now. See if we can test every microphone. It's on.
I'm Robin Baird. I'm on the Committee of Scientific Advisors. Try one more time. I'm on the Committee of Scientific Advisors, and although I'm based in Olympia, Washington, I've been working here in Hawaii for the last 20 years.
I'm Samantha Strömberg, also with the Scientific Advisor. I'm with the Wildlife Conservation Society as their wildlife statistician, covering both terrestrial and marine issues, but I do have a soft spot for cetaceans, where I've previously done work for the International Whaling Commission, and also that's where most of my survey work has been done, cetacean surveys.
Hello, I'm Jason Baker. I am also on the Committee of Scientific Advisors, and my day job is with the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center. And unlike the mostly role of whale huggers here, I'm a seal guy.
Okay, so we'll go back to Patty Roselle in the back row.
Good morning. I'm Patty Roselle. I'm also on the Committee of Scientific Advisors, and like Jason, my day job is with the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, and mostly focused on marine mammal genetic issues, population structure, taxonomy, and things like that.
Aaron?
Good morning. My name is Aaron Thode. I'm a research scientist at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm on the advisory committee as well. My specialty is underwater acoustics, including the effect of sound on marine mammal behavior and the use of sound to track and localize animals.
Right, and Patty and Aaron are in the back row because they're very shy. They're our shyest members of the committee. So, Randy?
I'm Randy Wells. I'm with Chicago Zoological Society. I primarily work on small cetaceans now, but my first participation in a commission meeting was in Honolulu in, I believe, 1978 on humpbacks.
Good morning, I'm Sue Moore, and I am on the Science Advisory Committee. I think I'm here mostly to work with marine mammal ecosystem issues and still a little bit with acoustic issues.
I'm Vera Metcalf. I live in Nome, Alaska. I believe my first meeting with the commission was in 2009 here in Hawaii. I work with the Walrus Commission, so my work evolves a lot around the Pacific walrus. We have a co-management agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service, so we're waiting for the final report that is soon to come out. But my husband is here. It's great to be here. Thank you.
So we'll just tiff and move through the staff quickly, then we'll get going on our next session.
I'm Tiff Brook.
It's on.
Can you hear me? Yes.
All right.
I'm Tiff Brookins. I'm a biologist at the Commission.
Mara Howe, as Peter mentioned.
Brady O'Donnell, Communications at the Commission.
Roxanne Carini, I'm the Knaus Fellow for the year at the Commission.
Michael.
Mike Goslinger, I'm the General Counsel of the Commission.
Dennis Heineman, I'm Senior Advisor for Fisheries and Ecosystems.
Vicki Cornish, work on energy policy issues, and I am the Alaska Native Liaison for the Commission.
I'm Dee Allen. I'm the Research Program Officer for the Commission.
And I'm Sam Simmons, the Scientific Program Director and also a Research Associate at UC Santa Cruz.
And I'm Daryl Jordan, Staff Assistant and Microphone Tester.
And up front, thanks to all the staff and all the commissioners and scientific advisors, and to the folks at the hotel for all the work to get us seated here today. It's really been fantastic so far, and we're hoping it'll keep up. So now I'm going to introduce Brady, right? Yeah. Brady O'Donnell to start our first session on an overview of Pacific Island issues. Thanks, Brady.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Brady O'Donnell. As Peter introduced, I'm the Communications Officer for the Commission, and it's my pleasure to kick off the meeting. And we're having our overview session of the Hawaiian Islands, and that'll start with two awesome presenters, so I'm really excited. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our presenters to come on up and sit on either side, and I'll introduce the first one. And that is Jeff Polavina. He was the chief for the Ecosystem and Oceanography Division of the NIMS Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, and he's now retired, but we were able to bring him back. So he was the first presenter at our last annual meeting in Hawaii back in 2009. So we're really excited to kind of get this context from what we listened to 10 years ago, now back today. And then next, you'll see her a lot throughout the meeting, is Erin Olson. And it's my pleasure to introduce her because she's the lead scientist for the Cetacean Research Program at NIMS Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center. So with that, I'm going to open up Jeff's presentation. All will go according to plan. And thank you for those on the webinar for hanging on, and we're going to make sure that this runs smoothly for you guys. And as long as I get the cue from the webinar that's running, it looks like we're sharing our screen, and we are good to go. All right, with that, I'll take Jeff. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Brady, and aloha. It's nice to be invited. Is there? Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. Whoops. Okay, that should work now. Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for the invitation to give a talk on the subtropical gyre. This satellite surface chlorophyll composite nicely illustrates the regions of the subtropical gyres in the world's oceans as regions shown by the light and dark blue areas, regions of the lowest surface chlorophyll. And in the North Pacific, you can just barely make out the Hawaiian archipelago sort of in the center of the gyre here. It doesn't, I guess it don't have a pointer, but it, okay. Okay. But anyway, we're pretty much sitting right now at the center of the subtropical gyre. And these boundaries, well, the waters of the subtropical gyre are warm and create vertical stratification, so the deep nutrients are mixed very weakly up to the surface, resulting in low surface or oligotrophic waters that are low in nutrients and low in surface chlorophyll, hence the low surface, I don't know what I'm going to point on, low surface chlorophyll, the blue, light and dark blue. These boundaries are determined by broad oceanographic and meteorological characteristics. The northern boundary is the boundary of the North Pacific Current. It's also the lower limb of the westerlies. The eastern boundary is the California Current. We have the North Equatorial Current at the southern boundary, and then the Kuroshiro on the west, and then the Kuroshiro Extension Current on the northeast. These boundaries can be dynamic seasonally. For example, this northern boundary can shift 1,000 kilometers from about 30 north to 40 north as the westerly wind field shifts seasonally and the water becomes more or less vertically stratified. And then there's interannual and decadal variability in these boundaries, as well as climate impacts, and we'll talk a bit about that. The region, the subtropical gyre, supports a very diverse food web, going from, of course, phytoplankton at the base. Then there's a couple trophic levels of a community called micronecton that consists of small fishes like myctophids, small squids, gelatinous organisms, mollusks, crustaceans. And then foraging on that community are two other trophic levels, some commercially valuable fishes, some protected species, and at the apex we have the large billfishes, sharks, and toothed marine mammals. Now it's a bit of an enigma that this relatively unproductive region would support some of the largest animals in the ocean. And partly that's done because while on average there's low productivity, there are spatially separated hotspots that these highly mobile animals can exploit. And these hotspots are created by either oceanographic features such as fronts and eddies, or topographic features like banks and seamounts that break up this vertical stratification and allow deep nutrients to come up to the surface and enhance productivity, primary productivity, that's then concentrated by physical processes to create densities sufficient to support food webs that go up to the top trophic levels. There's also vertical densities or heterogeneity from the surface down to 1,000 meters, and this lower figure here is a backscatter diagram over the course of 24 hours around Hawaii, showing a number of these layers of micronecton as yellow and red features. Here's one at 100 meters and another one around 300 meters, and then 500 to 600 meters, and another one down here around 900 meters. And then, of course, at sunset, many of these organisms rapidly migrate to the euphotic zone to forage through the night, and then quickly descend at dawn to depths. But some of the community does not migrate. And so many of these mobile animals have developed physiological strategies to be able to forage at depth to pursue these micronecton communities. Now, the fisheries are an important component of the food web, and in the subtropical gyre, it's really the big commercial fisheries or longline fisheries. The pursane fisheries are relegated to areas of shallow thermoclines, the equatorial and upwelling regions. The number of big fleets internationally have longline fisheries in the subtropical gyre. Around Hawaii, there's a substantial longline fishery. It's a limited entry fishery, and it's composed of two components. There's a shallow set fishery that targets swordfish that's somewhat seasonal from about November to May, fishing shallow, setting the gear shallow at night with light sticks in areas around 30 north to 40 north, north of the Hawaiian archipelago. The bigger part of the longline fishery is the deep set fishery, and it targets tuna, but catches about 24 commercially important species, and it sets gear around 300 to 400 meters depth. The fishery fishes an enormous area, 13 million square kilometers around Hawaii, and its annual revenues are exceeding $100 million a year, making it by far Hawaii's biggest fishery, but also in the top 10 regularly nationwide. If you have a chance to visit the fish auction when you're in Honolulu, you'll see a lot of the big pelagics laid out there being auctioned. Spatially, this fishery started in a core region in the late 80s, spanning from about 12 north to 27 north latitude and 170 to 150, this box. But then about 2005, as effort continued to increase, it's expanded, additional efforts expanded northeast of this box, the second figure here just shows how the effort has increased. This core area, the effort sort of capped out around 30 million hooks since about 2005, and there's been about another 20 million hooks annually in this more northeasterly region, often in the third quarter of the year. We can look at how this fishery, the catch rates of this fishery have changed by tracking catch rates in this box, which has been continually fished over a number of decades. And what we noticed was that a lot of the larger fish, the tunas, the sharks, the marlins, have exhibited declining catch rates of 2 to 7% per year, while a number of the smaller components of the fishery have experienced increasing catch rates over time from 2 to as much as 15% per year. Some of these have no commercial value, like the lancet fish and the snake mackerel. Those are discarded immediately on landing. But a number of others have important commercial value, like the mahi and the walu and the pomfret. So if we look at about the two dozen most common fish caught in the fishery, we can split them up into two size categories to explore this idea of what's happening to the smaller fish versus the larger fish in terms of catch rates. And if we split them up into a group of small-sized fish, less than 15 kilograms, and large fish greater than 15 kilograms, we can see this divergent trend in catch rates. The top line here is the catch rates of the small fish, which has increased relative to 96 by about 25% over time, while the catch rates of large fish have declined as much as 50%. So this is suggesting that we're seeing changes in the size structure of the populations. But of course, fisheries data has its own caveats. So is this a question of fishing down the food web, where the fishery is removing some of these large fish and shifting to some of the smaller fish? Or is it a top-down response that as you remove the large fish, the population of smaller sized fish increases due to a reduction in the competition for prey and some predation? Well, we test this with an ecosystem, a size-based ecosystem model, where we look at the population size of large fish, and this, as we increase fishing pressure to reduce the population of large fish by about 50%. The top line shows the increase in the population size and the catch rates of smaller fish, which increases about 15%. So and the thing about this model is that we keep the size, the gear selectivity and the targeting of the fishery constant. So we're getting rid of this idea that maybe the fishery is changing its targeting. So in a case where you have a constant size selectivity of the gear and a constant targeting, there does seem to be a top-down response in this ecosystem, whereas you remove these larger animals, the smaller animals, populations of some of these smaller animals do increase. So there's a trophic cascade that's occurring. And there may be some benefit here for some of the marine mammals. There might be more mahi-mahi and ono for false killer whales. There might be, as you reduce the populations of swordfish, there might be more big squids for sperm whales, for example. So the ecosystem response from the top down is that the fishery really is a keystone species. It's the only keystone species in the ecosystem. It changes the ecosystem size structure and species composition, pushing it toward smaller size organisms. Of course, there are gear interactions in the fishery, and you'll hear a lot about that. Our local management council is addressing reducing these gear interactions. They're rare. But that's an area that local management actions have been developed. On a basin scale, the management of the longline fisheries, or the tuna fisheries, is really two international RMFOs, one in the Eastern Pacific, one in the Western Pacific. And the basic management regulation is to set harvest quotas for 3 species, big eye tuna, yellowfin tuna, and striped marlin. Is this going to be enough to prevent further shifting of the ecosystem size structure and impacts on these vulnerable species? Well, that's an issue of some debate. So let's shift now and look at bottom-up responses. in this ecosystem. And you're probably quite familiar with these two modes here of oceanographic or climate variability. The bottom is the El Nino or ENSO, El Nino and Southern Oscillation. And the top is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. These figures are showing anomalous temperatures, and wind. The color is the anomalous temperatures, surface temperatures, and the arrows are the anomalous winds for these two phases of the PDO and two phases of the ENSO. The point I want to make here is the subtropical gyre spans both parts of these dipoles in both situations. So if during an El Nino or a positive phase of the PDO, the northern part of the gyre experiences colder water, stronger westerlies, enhanced productivity in both cases, while the southern part of the gyre is experiencing warmer water, more stratified conditions. So when you're talking about climate variability impacts in the subtropical gyre, you really have to specify what part of the gyre you're talking about because it could be opposite phases during the same climate event. And just to give you an example of the impacts of some of this variability, climate variability on the moving the northern boundary of this gyre on a marine mammal population, this is some work that Jason Baker and colleagues have done. This surface chlorophyll image, satellite surface chlorophyll image, shows this two regions of oceanographic conditions here. The blue or the ligotrophic vertically stratified low surface chlorophyll, the green or the high nutrient high surface chlorophyll, this is surface chlorophyll color here, and the northern atolls of the Hawaiian archipelago in this box lie close to the boundary between these two water masses in the winter. And in some winters, during La Nina conditions or negative phase of the PDO, these northern atolls are continually in ligotrophic, low nutrient, low productivity water. In other years, particularly during El Nino and positive phase of the PDO, the westerlies increase in strength, push down this high nutrient, high chlorophyll, more productive waters, and these northern atolls are in these more productive waters for a number of months. And Jason's noted with a long time series of monk seal pup survival that in these conditions, monk seal pup survival is substantially higher after these conditions occur than when they're in years when the oligotrophic waters cover these atolls for the whole year. So now shifting to climate change, this long-term climate change, the point here is that this is not something that's going to happen in the future, but we've seen a number of decades of the ocean changing already. And just a couple examples, north of Oahu, we have this station Aloha, the Hawaiian Ocean Time Series, and this is pH, showing, since the late 80s, we're seeing a continued decline in pH in oceanic waters, and now current levels of pH are well below what they were at the beginning of this time series. So the ocean chemistry is in a different regime than it was even a couple decades ago. Likewise, sea surface temperature has been increasing over this subtropical gyre averaged. We're seeing temperatures now that both in the summer and the winter are above anything that have been seen since the satellite record in the mid-80s. We use climate models to project how these conditions are going to impact the biology and the gyre going forward. One of the ways we do it is just look at how the subtropical gyre, the dimensions of the subtropical gyre will change in the future. And many models predict an expansion of the subtropical gyre by the end of the century. The black line is the estimate of the area of the subtropical gyre. Here's Hawaiian archipelago at the beginning of the century, and the black line is the beginning of the century, and the red line is where it'll be at the end of the century, and projecting about 1,000 kilometers northward shift and 2,000 along the equator, increasing the area of the subtropical gyre by about 30% by the end of the century. We can use about a dozen climate models that have zoology or zooplankton in them to project how the change at the base of the food web will change by the end of the century. And Most of these models project that as the ocean warms and the westerlies shift further north, the gradients of sea surface temperature weaken the wind fields, vertical mixing is reduced, the deep nutrients are not mixed up to the same extent. So zooplankton densities will decline 20 to 40% throughout large areas of the subtropical gyre. So we're seeing, as more stratified conditions occur, less nutrients supporting a lower productivity of zooplankton. That combined then with, as the temperatures warm, the metabolism of animals increases, so their food requirements go up, so the overall carrying capacity of many organisms will decline even further, 40 to 50% in large areas around the subtropical gyre by the end of the century relative to the beginning of the century. And of course, marine mammals and fisheries will both be impacted. Some of them highly mobile marine mammals will find areas of productivity by moving further north or east, although some of the insular ones like monk seals and some of the spinner dolphin populations and insular false killer whales may have to deal with this lower productivity regime that's developing. The fisheries yields are projected to drop by, this is the blue line, dotted blue line is the yield curve as a function of fishing mortality for the fishery at the beginning of the century, and this is at the end of the century. You can see about a 50% drop in productivity. The green lines, the dotted line, is the size structure of the catch at the beginning of the century. About 25% of the catch is projected to be large fish. By the end of the century, that'll be only 15%. So not only is the carrying capacity going down, but the size structure, again, climate and fisheries are operating in the same way, driving the size structure of the ecosystem to smaller size organisms. So in summary, we're projecting a lower carrying capacity, fishery yields perhaps decreasing 2 to 5% per decade, and fishing and climate are working together. The subtropical gyre doesn't exhibit as rapid changes in physical and biological parameters as you see in the mid-latitudes or in the Arctic. But in those areas, you're losing populations that might migrate out, but you're gaining populations that are migrating in from more southerly latitudes. And you're getting higher productivity in some cases in those regions because you're getting warmer water conditions. But in the subtropics, we're going to lose resources that migrate out. The conditions are becoming warmer, and it's not clear if anything is going to migrate into these areas. So overall, I think the subtropical gyre is going to have climate impacts, although more subtle, will have a greater impact on the ecosystem services that the subtropical gyre provides than other regions. And I'll stop there and turn it over to Aaron, I guess.
So we will hold questions until after Aaron presents, and I know we're already kind of pushed for time, so we'll just kind of be mindful of that as well. Thanks, Aaron. Oh, yeah. Sorry. So, let's go this down.
Good morning, I'm Erin Olson, and I'm going to apologize now for the amount of time I'm going to be spending up here in front of you over the next few days. With that in mind, and given also we're short on time, I'm actually going to kind of keep this a little bit brief and also at a very high 80,000 foot level of sort of cetacean science in the region at this point, and I'll leave some of the more details to our coming discussions. There are currently 25 species known to occur in our region. I say and counting because particularly with additional passive acoustic monitoring effort in the region, we've been identifying species of beaked whales that we cannot associate with a particular known species, and we believe those are probably species that are part of this pool of Mesoplodon spa that we all write down when we can't tell what species it is during a visual survey. And a couple of those are even on this slide. Up in the right-hand corner is Durrani-Agala's beaked whale, identified at Palmyra Atoll in 2006 by a graduate student at Scripps working in coordination with the Science Center. This suite of 25 species includes migratory large whales, lots of pelagic delphinids, beaked whales, deep divers, as well as migratory large whales. Just to put our assessment mission in a little bit of context, so the Pacific Islands region has the largest share of nymph stocks that are currently being tracked at a national level. And very few of these are adequately assessed. And when I say adequate, I'm using the tier system that was developed long time ago by Richard Merrick and colleagues, where tier 0 is essentially that we know that it exists in a space, but that's about all we know. And tier 3 would be a very precise and robust assessment. So 38% of all nymph stocks occur in the Pacific Islands region, and 59% of those are either tier 0, meaning we don't know anything other than that they exist in a space, or tier 1, where we have minimum or outdated assessment. So this might be, we've done some survey and we have maybe some assessment of minimum abundance or a little bit of idea of stock structure or distribution, but not enough to write a robust stock assessment. And this only represents those stocks that we know exist. So coming up, I'll show our incomplete survey efforts in the area, and there are many parts of the Pacific Islands region where we know only of a single stock or a handful of stocks that exist in that space because there has been no survey effort. So the cetaceans in the Pacific Islands region that what I'm talking about today are primarily these EEZ areas outlined in red. There are a number of marine national monuments that occur or that overlap our EEZ space. Most of them are shown here: the Papahanao-Mokuakea Marine National Monument in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, the Marianas Trench and Islands units in that archipelago, several small monuments in each of the Pacific remote islands and atolls, and actually the entire EEZ of Wake, Johnston, and Jarvis are considered marine monument areas. For some reason they didn't quite work out on my Google map. But this represents about 1.5 million square nautical miles of US EEZ, which is about half of all of the waters that the National Marine Fisheries Service is responsible to manage for protected species. There's 121 stocks of 25 species that are known to occur, and as I said already, this includes migratory, pelagic, and insular island-associated populations. And most of these pelagic populations we consider transboundary in that they pay no attention to the red line on the map and move freely between the EEZ areas and the high seas areas that surround them. A quick overview of the number of stocks in each area, not to necessarily note all of them specifically, but the highest number of stocks currently being assessed is 39, and that's in the Hawaiian EEZ, largely attributable to the amount of survey effort that has occurred there over the many decades, and also the significant effort to identify island-associated populations, thanks to many of the, primarily Robin's work and a lot of other work that folks have done using small boat-based work surveys in the area. The reasonable number of stocks identified in the Marianas is due to the past 10 years of survey work that the Science Center has been doing in collaboration with the U.S. Navy to understand what species are occurring there and something about their distribution and abundance in order for the Navy to assess their impacts. So of note, the smallest one here, Jarvis Island, we know, I am fairly confident that more than one species of cetacean exists there. But we have actual documentation of only bottlenose dolphins, and that's from towed diver surveys that are conducted by the Coral Reef Ecosystem Program, who actually have taken photos of bottlenose dolphins underwater while they're towing and counting reef fish. The map here now shows the large-scale cetacean assessment surveys that have occurred throughout the Pacific Islands region. Most of these surveys, so there are 3 that have occurred in the Hawaiian archipelago, 2002, 2010, and just in 2017, each shown in their own color there. They span the entire EEZ, take up nearly 6 months of ship time effort, and quite a large investment, and they are considered cetacean and ecosystem assessment surveys, such that we're collecting not only the data that we need to assess abundance and distribution of cetaceans, but also a variety of habitat variables so that we can try to relate some of that distribution and abundance data with other ecosystem parameters. There have also been surveys throughout the Palmyra and Johnston and high seas waters in between. That was largely due to high bycatch of false killer whales that was occurring in the Palmyra EEZ back in the mid-2000s. Those bycatch and fishing effort has largely shifted to the east now, and I'll talk a little bit more about Palmyra in a few minutes. There's been a number of small vessel surveys, primarily around Hawaii, that have really contributed to our stock assessment efforts, and also in Guam and the Marianas, but there are a number of spaces for which we have never done a systematic or even unsystematic cetacean survey. One way that the Science Center in particular is trying to augment the data available in order to evaluate cetacean occurrence in the region is through the Pacific Islands Passive Acoustic Network. That's essentially the deployment of long-term passive acoustic instrumentation that's monitoring almost the full suite of acoustic bandwidth that the cetaceans in the region are vocalizing within. We're monitoring. We've now shown actually that while Kogia are vocalizing above the range of what we thought we were recording, we are actually getting a little bit of their signal dribbling over. So we're monitoring the full suite of cetacean species that are vocal. The green sites here are active acoustic monitoring locations. There are 6 within the region presently. One has been ongoing since 2007, right in the middle of Robin's long-term cetacean study area there. For those who went out on the boat yesterday, you probably drove right over it. And then we have 3 in the Mariana EEZ, primarily addressed or trying to address some of the questions around species distribution and abundance in the Marianas with respect to Navy interests in the area. The other recorders in orange that are no longer recording, some of them still represent quite long data sets. At Palmyra Atoll, we recorded from 2006 through 2012, so about a 6-year data set there, and then sporadic recordings at other locations that are all in aggregate going into a number of efforts to evaluate long-term occurrence of cetaceans in these spaces. So as I already showed in the map, the number of stocks that are attributable to each of our EEZ areas, but relative to that is maybe even a bit more striking with what we don't know. So the number of stocks with a current abundance estimate, and when I say current, I'm using the NIMS guidelines for assessing marine mammal stocks sort of guideline here of 8 years. So if the abundance estimate is greater than 8 years old, then I'm not counting it. So the only EEZ for which we have current abundance estimates is the Hawaiian archipelago. And a handful of those stocks, more than a handful of stocks there, do not have current abundance estimates, either because we don't see them very often or ever during our shipboard surveys, or because shipboard surveys aren't well designed for surveying insular stocks. And so we're really reliant on mark recapture and other types of data that Robin does a great job collecting, but that takes a lot of work to process. And we're quite all a bit far behind on that. Stocks with human cause mortality estimates. So when I refer to that, I'm saying essentially the data that come from observer programs and the response networks that operate in Hawaii. So we have a number of stocks in Hawaii that either for which we have a human cause mortality estimate for the fishery or that we know have not been observed interacting with the fishery. And the same data sets help us evaluate Palmyra, Johnston, and the American Samoa longline fishery also has an observer program. So, and then finally the number of SARs, noting that the humpback whale SAR is managed by Alaska Center, so I counted it here, but technically it's not my responsibility. And so we're currently at something like 45 stock assessment reports that we maintain now and then. Just noting a couple of specific spaces here, Palmyra and Johnston. If you remember from the survey map, there has been quite a bit of survey coverage in those spaces. And so then a valid question about why we don't have abundance estimates. And it in part goes back to Jeff's discussion of the oceanography. With limited amount of surveyed data in those spaces and very low abundance of cetaceans there, the encounter rates are just too low for us to pursue standard line transect abundance estimation for many species. We have developed habitat-based density estimates for some, and those are useful in a number of contexts, but aren't currently adopted for formal management under MMPA. And then with all of some recent work we've been doing in Guam and the Marianas, we are on the cusp of being able to do more with cetacean assessment there, and I expect when you come back again, hopefully in less than 10 years, this number will be much greater than 0. So just a couple notes about stock structure. Jeff noted that we do have a number of insular stocks in Hawaii. 98 of 121 stocks, or 81%, are recognized as EEZ-wide stocks, and that was just the default under, and is the default under MMPA and GAMS for designating stocks, unless you have additional information where you can do something more finely scaled. The island ecosystems here do have much higher productivity than the broader pelagic oligotrophic waters, and those island ecosystems support insular populations. And in almost all cases, when the data are available to test for structure, we generally do find finer scale structure than a single broadly distributed pelagic population. All stocks with finer levels of structure are island associated, and there are a couple of examples of quite fine structure. Spinner dolphins and bottlenose dolphins are good examples of that. And then in all cases, we also designate a pelagic stock as sort of the catch-all of all of those species occurring outside of those insular stocks, but also acknowledging that there are true pelagically roaming distributed species in the region. So just 2 examples here. False killer whales, there are currently 3 stocks in Hawaiian waters. The main Hawaiian, this is telemetry data. The main Hawaiian Islands insular stock is shown in red, and you can see the quite tight association with the main Hawaiian Islands, despite many dozens of tags deployed on that group, on that stock. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands insular stock in green, and then the more broadly distributed pelagic stock in blue. So sort of nicely illustrating the stock differences. And then on the right, bottlenose dolphins, which are very tightly associated with the shoreline, and 4 separate island-associated populations in the main Hawaiian Islands. So we've shown that we are lagging behind in our ability to assess stocks, as should have been evident from the table that I presented. And we've been pursuing a number of efforts to try to improve that. One of them has been the Passive Acoustic Network, as I showed, but also we've recently partnered with the Navy and BOEM to develop the Pacific Marine Assessment Program for Protected Species, PAC maps. And this is the analog of the now fairly long-standing Atlantic program of similar name, AMAPS, and then the newly established Gulf of Mexico maps, GOMAPS. So now we all have our own maps. And the idea here is that NIMS is providing the ship time and the survey expertise, while the other agencies are providing the funds to conduct the surveys. And acknowledging that we have a joint interest in the data products that are arising from the efforts. So the Navy and the BOEM are particularly interested in the density maps, what density estimates, or in particular the habitat-based density maps, and we can use the full suite of data for a variety of questions. The initial 5-year agreement started in 2017 and includes survey effort and then modeled density products. The effort started here in Hawaii with the 179-day Hawaiian Islands Cetacean and Ecosystem Assessment Survey. The analysis for that is currently just finishing up. In 2018, the effort rotated to the West Coast, and then in 2019, we were supposed to be back here doing a winter survey in Hawaii. With the unfortunate government shutdown and the extended time at home for all of us, the 2019 winter survey had to be postponed. So we'll now be doing that winter survey in 2020, and the rest of the schedule has essentially just sort of gotten pushed back a year in the process. But up next after that will be a large-scale visual and passive acoustic survey of the Mariana Archipelago and perhaps the eastern Gulf of Alaska. So, and again, the ultimate product or intended output of these efforts are these species distribution density and density maps. This is just an example of pilot whales from a paper that Karen Forney put out in 2015, showing the density hotspots relative to all the survey data. And we, as part of this 2017 effort, we're now updating these species density maps for each of the species within the Hawaiian archipelago. Another effort towards advancing our assessment mission without a lot of ship time are new assessment tools, including drifting acoustic spar buoy recorders. Jay Barlow developed these in 2014-15 timeframe. They're essentially a drifting mooring with an acoustic recorder at 150 meters and 2 hydrophones 10 meters apart, arranged vertically, and essentially what that allows you to do is get the bearing, angle, and range to a vocal group from which you can derive distance and then put that into a point transect framework and derive density. We can't derive density yet. Jay's still working on that, but the data are useful for a variety of things nonetheless, and I'm very confident that Jay will figure this out, the density piece, in short order. But in the meantime, we have already learned quite a few interesting things from DASPER deployments in Hawaii and the Marianas. On the left side is beaked whale detections during deployments of 8 DASPERs in the Marianas in the summer of 2018. Essentially showing this quite stark north-south segregation of all of the beaked whale species, with the exception of these cross seamount beaked whales that sort of are just scattered around, but relatively high detection rates of Blainville's and Cuvier's beaked whales in the northern part of the study area, spanning all the way from the archipelago west to the West Mariana Ridge. And these data are going to be particularly helpful as we work to design a large-scale survey in the region for 2021. So the very quick overview of threats, known and potential threats to cetaceans in the Pacific Islands region. This is going to get a bit busy, hence the color coding, and then I'll go into a couple of them in a little bit more detail. But we have bycatch in the Hawaii longline fishery. Jeff nicely covered the fishery's survey or scope and scale. And of course, with that, unfortunately, comes incidental interactions with cetaceans, and in this case, most notably, false killer whales. There are military testing and training ranges in Hawaii and in the Marianas. And then we have hooking and entanglement in nearshore fisheries in both Hawaii and the Marianas, as well as in American Samoa. Bycatch in the American Samoa longline fishery, vessel strikes recorded in Hawaii. Swim with dolphin programs are well known to occur in the protected bays off of the islands here in the main Hawaiian Islands, but also we're now getting reports of that occurring in Guam in some of the protected bays there. And then, of course, bycatch in international fisheries, and then many things that are much more difficult to quantitatively evaluate: ocean noise, prey competition, pollutants, geophysical research, which seems to have been picking up in the last few years here in Hawaii, and then seafloor mining. So a couple of these, just in a little bit more detail. We have our 2 response networks that provide information on injured cetaceans, primarily large whales: the Pacific Islands Marine Mammal Response Network and the Hawaiian Islands Entanglement Response Network. And I believe David will be talking about these a bit more tomorrow. But it largely involves humpback whales entangled in fishing gear and marine debris or struck by a vessel. And from 2007 to 17, there were 63 vessel strikes reported, and 16 of those would have been considered serious injuries. And notably, 12 of those involved the vessel hitting a calf. So other things that we're going to be primarily spending much more time talking about as later today and as the week goes on: bycatch in the Hawaii and American Samoa longline fishery, where the data primarily come from the Observer program. Interactions with nearshore fisheries that are mainly evident through Robin's work with identifying these dorsal fin scars and then digging deeper into that problem to better understand the scope and scale of species and spatial extent. And then swim with programs, which we will be talking about shortly. The Navy has 2 testing and training ranges in Hawaii, or in the region, one around Hawaii and one around the Marianas. The yellow areas are where they've identified the majority of their active sonar testing and training occurs, and a whole other suite of activities could occur throughout the rest of the blue area. We have recorded both mid and low frequency active sonar on our acoustic recorders in the regions. So cetacean management concerns that require better science. Well, false killer whales are high on the list. Mitigating bycatch, impacts in nearshore fisheries, understanding abundance and trends and demographics. I didn't go into any of these things in detail because we will talk about them more in the coming days. Population structure and status for ESA listed large whales. As we saw, humpback whales have now been broken into several DPSs, and I expect same may happen for other large whales, and that will help us refine the role that the Pacific Islands plays in their populations. And then spinner dolphin abundance and health. So to conclude, 121 stocks in 8 Pacific Islands region areas, with only 47 of those in our stock assessment reports. Not that the stock assessment report is the end-all product of cetacean work, but it's a nice metric. And the Science Center has been working hard to use robust quantitative approaches for overcoming sample size limitations and abundance estimation, and processing a lot of previously unaccounted for information on human-caused mortality and incorporating that into the stock assessments. The challenges are we are still constrained by the size of our space, the high cetacean diversity, and the low cetacean density, and balancing the needs of assessing poorly known stocks with updating assessments for high priority stocks. Oh, there's my labels. So with that, I can transition into the questions.
Testing. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much, both of you guys, for presenting, and I really appreciate it, as do we all. Given in the essence of time, we're gonna focus on questions from the commissioners and the Committee of Scientific Advisors and then MMC staff. And because we're pressed for time, I'm probably gonna ask that those of you in the audience maybe direct your questions to Jeff, if you have them to him, because Aaron will be available even in the next session. So please be mindful of that as well. And we'll go from there. We'll try to keep it to 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. You spoke to us in 2009 and gave a very similar talk. I guess I'd ask, so in your mind, what is the biggest thing that's changed since 2009? Has it just continued as predicted, or is it something really surprised you or changed dramatically?
Well, we're certainly more aware of both the impacts of the longline fishery. We have decades, another decade of data, and trends look, continuing. And we're much more aware now that climate impacts have been happening earlier than we thought. And now we're able to use Earth system models to make these projections going forward. And I should just point out, though, that there's still so many caveats when we try to project climate impacts. We're really unsure of how various parts of the ecosystem are going to change as ocean chemistry changes. If this micronecton community evolves to have more gelatinous organisms, that may impact how the food web energy flows up the food web. If the base of the food web, which seems to be evolving to more nitrogen-fixing cyanobacteria, that's projected to continue, and how that will impact the energy flow going up to higher trophic levels is some uncertainty as well. So we have more tools and we're making more projections, but we're also aware that where there's so much uncertainty, there'll be surprises, and there's just a lot of caveats and gaps in still where we are in understanding the impacts of climate change on the oceanography and the ecosystem.
Well, thank you both for great, I would say not inspiring opening talks, really quite alarming and depressing. So Jeff, I was curious, you gave a very clear description of fisheries as a keystone species almost. And so now we do have areas where there is no fishing, we have the monument. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what we know about rate of change now that there has been a reduction in removal of some of the larger species or intermediate-sized species, and then how do we get more information on that? It seems like we take away our fisheries, but now we don't have that source of data.
So I mean, that's the challenge of this pelagic ecosystem, is that we don't do fishery-independent surveys the way some places operate with sort of acoustic surveys. because, you know, the catch rates are so low. We have to rely on fisheries data. That's our main source of information on the pelagic ecosystem. I mean, we can measure some things that are happening at the base of the food web with surveys or the oceanography with satellites, but to get the top of the food web, we really need these fishery surveys. One thing that the Science Center has implemented is some diet studies of some of the species like lancet fish, which tell us a little bit about how the middle of the food web might be changing. So that's important to be able to monitor the top from the fisheries and the bottom with, you know, biological surveys and satellites and something about the middle of the food web. The Papahanao-Mokuakea closure, it would be an interesting thing to try to monitor how the ecosystem in there has, with the absence of fishery, changed. Many of these resources move all across that space. So the pelagics, the highly mobile pelagics, are still being fished outside of that. So it's not so much of a closed area for many of the species that are caught in the fishery.
Let's go one more. Dennis?
Jeff, you mentioned the importance of local phenomena, oceanographic features, to increase productivity, but also to aggregate predators around prey. And I'm wondering about, do you think that there are enough fads out there to be producing a signal, an increase in availability of prey that's detectable on a system-wide basis?
Yeah, that's a real interesting idea. I mean, there are a lot of fads that are in operation around. But there's fish aggregation devices are fads. And of course, the big purse seine fisheries use fads to aggregate tunas and set their net around that. Purse seine fisheries don't operate in the subtropical gyre. So the fads, the fish aggregating devices, are used by local trollers that would aggregate fish and fish around them. Information on the records that's being caught around those is pretty scarce, I think. So I don't think anyone at the Science Center has really been looking at those records. But it could be an interesting sampling tool.
So I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you so much to our presenters. And
So we have a break now. Let's have the break 15 minutes so that we get back on time, as close to on time as we can. Thank you.
Well, I'm waiting to hear from him, so what should I tell him?
you show me how.
Check, check, check. Check 1, 2, check, check, check 1, 2. Check, 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 check.
Okay, where's the only one?
I will talk to Aaron and we'll try to find.
Check, check, check. Check, check, check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check, check. 1, 2. It's on. It should be on.
So she was just asking, if they have the presentations on the computers back there, that doesn't help, right?
No, not at all.
Okay. So that's what she's sorting out, which is why I was putting up her attending notes for her. So all you do here is do slideshow.
And then it goes straight to presenter mode.
But it's not going to cast it to those screens right now, right? The guys at the back.
Yeah,
have to
until
do
they
that?
give us the okay.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do, actually, is...
So sorry, I was just checking, because Randy's here now, just to let him know. It's just start the presentation. And it goes into presenter mode.
Oh yeah, so the present button is this little guy right
The
here.
slideshow there.
I've got 3 mics on the way.
Here, I'll let you stand and talk with that mouse and see that little, it looks like almost
This guy.
pull-down screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you click that.
Okay.
Check, 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 check. check, check.
So he said it's ultra clear, he can hear us right now, but I haven't responded back. So Brady's still trying to help her get prepared while he's spinning off and talk, so we'll just check in. Do you, for our session, how much time is left on the timer, do you think? So 3 for 13, and then Amber for 1, and then Red for 1, total 15. Green for 13, Amber for 1 minute, 15 for 3. Do you want green for 12, Amber for 1 minute, and green for 6? So, well, it's really like that. It makes sense to be green for 12, then the last minute of them, they're supposed to be done when the turns go. Amber for 1 minute, so Red for 2, and 15 to get them off. The lights on the podium are changing for the process. And we'll just put the people that are speaking to first on those initially. And then put well, these guys need to be sitting. Yeah, right. So we'll have to try and make room for everybody. Have you seen, is everybody here? Suzanne So the 5 people that speak before the public, I'm okay with that, I just wanted to check it out. Jason's and I need to load this, but then I need Josh, Amanda, Suzanne. Suzanne's not here yet. We've seen Josh. No, he's not here. None of the DLNR people are here, except for Amanda's here. Yeah, but Amanda's not here. I emailed you yesterday. She hasn't. Yeah, she's going to go to States over here. And if Suzanne's here, Brian's not sitting up there as well, right? No, Brian's not. Brian's not here. It's only Suzanne with me. Like, do you want to get lunch first, or do you want to do it this time? Just so I have some sort of understanding. Well, I think we might need to tag team it. So you go get lunch first. I'll stay here and do presentations, and then you'll be in the room to switch if we need to.
what it is what we talked about now. The men's card is too much. These guys are all fine with the So, let's take a look. So, switch back to the board. I thought that was it. This is 14. Go sorry. That's a bad deal. So mark that one that you just tried. It's for that. You go back to the original. Okay, go back to the original. Let's see what we got. You're in that? Yourself already? You're doing like that? Yeah, I don't know if it's myself. Is that one like super close? I mean, it's doable. It's doable.
I don't know that I need to do more than what Sam does with her whistle, but let's go ahead and get seated and get started. Thank you.
I got that.
Yeah, just had a good conversation.
Was that you? Yep.
I
thought I recognized that.
Did you hear it? Did you hear the whistle?
I was blown away. One thing we could.
Okay.
There you are. Okay, thanks. All right.
So I'm just going to make a note about that.
All right. Thank you all very much for returning to your seats so cooperatively. My name is Randy Wells, and I'll be chairing or moderating this session on spinner dolphins. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, if you're going to be asking questions, please use the microphones that are available or that are going to be passed around. When you use the microphones, please give us your name and your affiliation. This will help with our note-taking and also for those people who are off in the ether listening in on what we're doing out here today. This session has to do with spinner dolphins and the issues facing spinner dolphins. They're probably the most easy cetacean to see in Hawaiian waters, and it also makes them the most susceptible to human activities and interactions. 40 years ago, I saw what might have been the early days of disturbance in Kealakekua Bay. There were 2 boats that would come into the bay each day. At least one of those would follow the animals around the bay, and we were able to document deflections of the animals' positions as a result of the approaches by these boats. The interactions have become more frequent with many more vessels over the last 4 decades, to the point now where there is concern about what's going on with these animals in the future for them. There have been efforts to develop management regimes for taking care of them. So far, these have not resulted in a final rule. Today, we're going to find out more about the status of these animals, the issues they face, the status of management plans for these animals, and then we hope to have plenty of time left for discussion. We'll have 3 speakers and 4 talks first. We'll then ask for clarifying responses to clarifying questions, and then we will bring up additional panelists, and we'll open up the discussion after the commissioners, the scientific community members, and the staff have had a chance to ask their questions. With that, I would like to invite up our first speaker, someone with whom we're all plenty familiar at this point, Aaron Olson, who's the lead scientist, Cetacean Research Program of NIMS Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, who will give us an overview. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Randy. Okay, my job this morning is just to give you a quick update on the status and trends of spinners, and then Lars and Ann are going to talk in more detail about what we know about disturbance and current efforts to reduce it. Oops. Maybe.
Look at the emails. All right.
Back to monk seals.
We're back to monk. We don't want to. Little technical assistance.
Yeah, so this sometimes pops up and we just have to close out of it. And then we'll go to, sorry team. And then we should be able to go next. So, yeah.
All right, take 2. Okay, spinner dolphin population structure in the Hawaiian archipelago is made up of a number of 4 small island-associated populations, as well as a broadly distributed pelagic population. The insular structure is based on genetic differences, genetic assignment tests, and photo ID resite data. The bulk of those data come from the PhD dissertation of Kim Andrews, published in Molecular Ecology back in 2010, and then movement data from the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and then also from the main Hawaiian Islands that hasn't yet been published. You can see there are 2 island-associated stocks in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands. I'm not going to bother the pointer; I will blind somebody. One around Kire and Midway, and the other around Pearl and Hermes Reef. There also is a sizable tissue sample database from French frigate shoals, but the genetic analyses and assignment tests were sort of inconclusive into how those animals should be assigned with whether they were part of another population or not. So they are one that's sort of lingering out there that may at some point in the future be redesignated. In the lower left is the population structure within the main Hawaiian Islands of 3 separate groups, Kauai, Niihau, Oahu, and the Four Islands region, and the Hawaii Island stock. There, as was discussed in the opening remarks, there's been a long, long history of studying spinner dolphins in Hawaii, and in particular understanding the potential disturbance and actual disturbance on the animals. And so I'm going to just focus on most of the recent past here. The recent abundance data come primarily from 2 studies. The Pacific Islands Photo ID Network was established in 2006 with Marine Mammal Commission support as a collaborative spinner dolphin photo ID catalog, which integrated the efforts of various Hawaii researchers that were both working on spinner dolphins and also just taking a few minutes to stop and photograph some spinner dolphins on their way out of Honokahau. And then the Sapphire Project, which was led by Lars Beider. He'll be talking quite a bit more about this project right after I finish up here. But in the context of abundance and trends, it was an intensive year-round survey of the resting bays off the Kona coast over 2 years from 2010 to 2012. So the Pippin data set, at the time of its inception in 2006 up through 2009, ended up aggregating over 16,000 photos from 217 sightings of spinner dolphins within the main Hawaiian Islands, and that was across a group of about 10 collaborators, and resulting in 673 cataloged individuals. The catalog sizes and number of sightings and years and all of the contributors are broken down here in the table based on their stock affiliation. Essentially a fairly rich data set from spanning the years from 2001 through 2009 and from a variety of contributors. Most of the data from these Pippin efforts come from the leeward sides of the islands, as is quite common among cetacean studies in Hawaii, just because of the complexity and difficulty of working on the windward side, and that remains still a challenge for us in terms of stock assessment. There were 4 animals identified during the Pippin photo ID efforts that migrated across stock boundaries, 1 from Ni'ihau to Oahu, 2 from Oahu to the Big Island, and 1 from the 4 Islands region to the Big Island. 4 animals among over 600 is not enough to really make us question our stock boundaries, but is still intriguing and interesting, and also suggests that we need some more data collection from the windward sides to better understand the stock structure in general. So the Pippin effort led to a number of mark recapture estimates. There were some issues with the data set, primarily just related to, because it was an aggregation of data from a variety of researchers working in different spaces and times and with different goals, the data don't exactly all marry together perfectly. And so at the time that we were trying to work with the data, sort of the best we could do then was these minimum seasonal closed capture estimates, which end up providing an abundance estimate for a relatively small period of time. And you can see on the bottom there the sort of area to which the abundance estimates apply. And then within the table, just how constrained these abundance estimates were. There's probably a lot more we could do with this now. There's quite a bit more data, a lot more photographs that have been contributed to Pippin that haven't all been processed and integrated, but something more robust could come of this in the future. We still retain 2 of these estimates within the stock assessment report because they are the most recent estimates available, and in the case of the Kauai, Ni'ihau, and Oahu 4 Island stocks are the only estimates of abundance for those spaces, and they sort of serve as a reference minimum population size, even though we don't use them to calculate a PBR. The Sapphire data set, I'm just going to give the really quick highlights here because Lars is going to go into it in quite a bit of detail, but Sapphire was led by Murdoch University and Duke University, and specifically intending to develop robust mark recapture abundance estimates as well as a quantitative framework for evaluating disturbance of the dolphins. So the study area was the leeward coast of the Big Island, primarily these 4 bays, Makako Bay, Kealakekua, Honaunau, and Keaho, can't read, anyway, you can read it. Known as important resting bays for spinner dolphins. It was systematic boat-based photo ID survey that covered 2 years or 276 survey days, began in September of 2010 and had a very consistent monthly survey design. From that effort, they developed 2 consecutive within-year mark recapture estimates here. So 630 animals in 2010 and 668 in 2011. So the Sapphire estimates represent really the most robust, comprehensive abundance estimates for any of the main Hawaiian Islands spinner dolphin stocks at this time, but also for the Big Island, even despite all of the many decades of effort in the area. There have been 3 prior efforts to estimate abundance from the resting bays and the other nearshore waters back in the late 70s and then in the early 90s and then mid-2000s. And each of these abundance estimates, prior abundance estimates, are higher than what has come from the Sapphire effort. Of course, they didn't have nearly the comprehensive and intensive survey design, nor the quantitative framework that was used by Julian in his efforts here. So a little bit difficult to assess exactly what the trend is, other than that the abundance is relatively low. So the current population estimates, as noted in the stock assessment reports, are shown here for each of the stocks. As I said before, we've retained the mark recapture estimates from the PIPIN data set, even though we don't use them to estimate or to calculate PBR. In all cases, we consider that the trends are unknown, even though there are some troubling signs for the Big Island stock. And then the year of most recent data, in most cases, is quite old. Okay, just a quick note on other sources of human-caused mortality and serious injury, aside from disturbance caused by swim-with programs and boaters. So over the past, since 2005, there are 11 animals listed here that were reported to either the stranding network or the various response networks in Hawaii, and 10 of which were observed alive at sea. But the data that were available and collected from those encounters led us to classify those injuries as serious based on the characteristics of the fishing gear or net debris or whatever it was that was involved. So in all of these cases, there are 4 from Oahu and the other 7 from the Big Island. The animals were it's a similar story, entangled in some kind of either net or fishing line debris. Occasionally it was like a rubber band or a plastic bag, kind of other just gear or not even fishing related gear, just trash in the water. There was one case of an animal that was observed dead, pictured here, entangled in a gill net, or entangled in a piece of netting, not a gill net, seen off of Honokahau. So in 2 cases, swimmers attempted to remove gear from the animals. They were able to cut a lot of trailing gear off of them, but never able to really free them from the gear. And in all of these cases are now listed in the stock assessment report as serious human-caused injuries. So as Randy mentioned in the opening, several years ago, PIRO issued a draft rule to limit approach of spinner dolphins within 50 yards, and the rule was really intended to reduce disturbance. And then following on the heels of that, while waiting for the final rule, they convened a workshop with a number of researchers and managers across within Hawaii and beyond to evaluate or assess what data were available from which we could better evaluate population size and structure and assess the impact of a rule when and if it went into effect. So as you can imagine, that resulted in a sizable report that details millions of dollars in research efforts, and we were not making a lot of traction going on any of those in particular. So in late last year, the Science Center convened a small working group with the regional office, with Lars and his team at HIMB and with Mark Lammers at the sanctuary to develop a research program to address 2 high priority topics. And that essentially is generating stock-wide abundance estimates for each of the main Hawaiian Islands associated stocks, and with a priority towards Hawaii Island and the Oahu 4 Island stocks. And then assessing the impact of swim-with and approaching spinner dolphins relative to the overall health of the population at each of these focal islands. And with that sort of serving as the basis for evaluating the effectiveness of a 50-yard approach rule or other rule on population health. So those are even still very broadly defined large projects, and really what that means is that was broken down into 4 smaller projects that we've now been individually pursuing within the Science Center or Lars within HIMB or the regional office. This line transect abundance surveys at Hawaii Island, Oahu, and Maui Nui region were specifically acknowledging that while mark recapture techniques work quite well for spinner dolphins, they're very time intensive in terms of matching all of those photographs and developing your resulting abundance estimates, and that a line transect survey could serve this purpose, particularly in the needing to have updated abundance estimates for each of these stocks. So this was going to be facilitated by a rapid assessment using passive acoustic devices that would help us stratify the survey area. And although the funds were provided to get that project going in 2019, with the government shutdown, we haven't been able to actually pull the trigger on getting that started. So we'll probably be starting that early in 2020. And then have also been are in the process of partnering with Lars to bring on some survey design expertise to help us design this line transect survey that would explicitly incorporate photo ID and also other types of sampling, particularly in areas we haven't sampled previously. And we're trying to leverage NOAA vessels when we can to keep the cost down. So the other piece of this was examining occurrence and time spent resting before and after the rule is implemented using passive acoustic monitoring. A lot of this work is already underway, and I believe Anne will be talking about it in a few minutes, so I'm going to let that just sit there for now. Additionally, there was a one-year follow-up project to Sapphire with the specific goal of providing new, robust mark recapture estimates for this Kona coast for the same 4 resting bays prior to final rule implementation, and that can then serve as the true baseline before a rule that should be reducing impact goes into effect. And then finally, examining age structure to evaluate whether each population has a stable and healthy age distribution, and this is using UAS-based photogrammetry. And that project has been designed explicitly acknowledging that a lot of PCOD research, population consequences of disturbance research, has identified deviations in age structure, including reduced juvenile survival, as important metrics for assessing impacts of disturbance. And that project has already gotten underway. My team and Lars's team are doing a joint effort to calibrate the various drones that we use against animals of known size and weight and girth, using the captive animals at Sea Life Park and Dolphin Quest. And of course, those are not spinner dolphins, they are bottlenose dolphins, but the idea is that the metric calibration should still hopefully apply. And with that comes some other age class size structure work that Lars will be leading. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and leave it to someone else.
We'll save discussion till the discussion period, but are there any questions from the commissioners for clarification? Scientific advisors? Staff? Others in the audience? Again, please use the mic and give your name and your affiliation. Excellent job, Aaron.
I think Vicki had a question.
Oh, Vicki, okay.
Thank you, Aaron, that was great. I just had a question about the calibration process, and are you using animals from aquarium to do the calibration, or other animals that may be more representative of the wild population? I don't know how characteristic animals in aquaria are of the wild population, so just a question about that process.
Yeah, so the calibration project that's ongoing now at Sea Life Park is using I think it's 8 captive animals at Sea Life Park and 5 at Dolphin Quest. Some of them are Atlantic bottlenose, some are Pacific bottlenose, but the idea being that we can measure everything about them, length, girth, height, weight, eye color, everything, and correlate all of those things to the measurements we're getting from the drone.
So it's a composite. Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if Lars is planning to talk about this more, but we have the animals do a number of different, lay flat, do surfacings, do a variety of behaviors that are supposed to then emulate what we would capture in the wild if we were doing the same kind of measurements.
Great, thank you very much. Let's save the question until later, just to stay on time. Thank you. Our next speaker is Lars Bader, the director of the Marine Mammal Research Program, the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, who will speak to us about impacts of human disturbance on spinner dolphin resting behavior. You can go on down so you can see the slides a little better. All right. Where are you? Over on the end. Okay. Should be able to use the arrows.
Great, thank you. Aloha, and thank you for the kind invitation to come present this morning. Very good to be here. I am going to be presenting work from my previous PhD student, Julian Tyne, so credit goes to Julian, not myself, on this work here, and also Heather Heenahan, who's a PhD student, previous PhD student at Duke University. I want to provide the context and the history of the management of spinner dolphins in Hawaii, particularly working with NOAA going back 25 years. I want to give that historical context as we move forward. But first of all, this is really an important slide and really sets the scene, I believe. Carly Weiner has just submitted a paper that's evaluated the economic value of spinner dolphins in Hawaii. The Hawaiian Tourism Authority has just published their recent report. Hawaii Islands now receive 10 million people per year that come to the Hawaiian Islands. 30% of those goes to whale or dolphin watching. So over 3 to 3.5 million tourists per year goes to see whales and dolphins while they're here. Currently, these numbers that you see on this slide here are from 2013. It's on a timer. Since 2013, tourism has gone up, visitation rates have gone up 23% since these numbers have come out. So the value of direct value of spinner dolphin tourism just on these two islands alone is over $100 million per year. So what this does is it really puts into perspective the interest around these animals, but also the pressures of having to regulate this, but the pressures of also knowing that it's a viable industry and we have to keep it viable, but also it's the difficulty of actually trying to put restrictions around this. And these are some of the important pressures that really deal with this issue. Okay, Spinners 101. It's a little bit different from island to island, but I'm going to be focusing on the Kona coast. That's where most of this work was done. We've heard there's 5 or 6 distinct stocks. And spinner dolphins, most of you all know this, go offshore at night to forage, go into these resting sheltered bays during the daytime. So it really has this rigid behavioral pattern, which is very different from any other cetacean species, really. This has caused concerns for over 25 years. Randy mentioned it from already in the early 70s. It was already mentioned that this could become a problem. Here's an example. This is the bay right off the airport. And as you can see here, if animals are coming into these resting bays for 8 to 10 hours a day, they're supposed to be resting. This is a typical scene that you see. I have a 7-year-old daughter. She comes into my bedroom one time every night. One daughter can do a lot of damage to my sleep. So just want to put that in perspective here. So in 2005, so we go back 14 years now, NOAA published an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking aimed to reduce the impacts and disturbance of human activities by implementing time area closures in particularly four important resting bays off the Kona coast. So that was an advanced ruling. In 2010, 5 years later, NOAA initiated research to inform this preferred management option. And that research was then carried out by Murdoch University and Duke, which you heard earlier on. And this was funded by NOAA, by the Marine Mammal Commission, the state of Hawaii, and Dolphin Quest. So again, just want to highlight this is Julian and Heather's work, and I'm mainly going to be talking about Julian's work. Heather focused on acoustic aspects, way above my head. I don't understand acoustics. But I'm going to talk more about Julian's work, which was coming up with abundance estimates off the Kona coast, quantifying the behavioral repertoire of these animals, the importance of these resting bays, and also the exposure of human activity in these resting bays. And Julian has been very prolific in his publication rate and making his supervisor look very lazy compared to what he does himself. So you did see this map in Aaron's talk. So the focus of this study concentrated on the 4 main resting bays off the leeward side here on the Kona coast. There are known resting bays. Aaron mentioned about the effort. I'm just going to glance over this, but basically it was a year-round effort 24 consecutive months with 276 days on the water, targeting particularly these 4-inch resting bays and just outside of these resting bays. You've seen this slide. Aaron made an important point. We're comparing apples and oranges a little bit here. The first 4 abundance estimates that you see were not designed to come up with estimates. They were haphazard efforts in good faith to come up with abundance estimates, but data collected were not that purpose. The last 2 estimates were collected for the particular purpose of quantifying abundance. And those estimates are very similar, around 650 individuals across, independently across those 2 years. So certainly less animals than I would have thought. So that's the abundance work. Julian did a whole bunch of other work to get at these other questions that I mentioned, and I just briefly want to run through some of these results. A lot of this work was conducted or based on focal follows, so following groups of individuals for many, many hours at a time to get their IDs, but also what the behaviors are doing in the particular habitats. And his findings clearly corroborate Norris's work from the 70s and 80s, and that these animals come into the resting base. So this is time along the y-axis, the x-axis. So early morning, they come into the bays. As the day progresses, they go into more sleep. Socialize in the morning, you see less socializing during the day, and start socializing again in the afternoon and travel out the bays, which is consistent with what Norris spoke about in those days about 30 years ago. The focal follows again corroborated what Norrison was showing, that the shelter bays are critical for rest. The majority of rest does occur within the bays. This is again based on these focal follows. Next, and this is a paper that Julian just has had out. He's gone through the literature and looked at any study that has tried to quantify human exposure to any cetacean species. And what comes out here is the spinner dolphins off the Kona coast of Hawaii have the highest human exposure rates to anywhere in the world. 83% of the time when they're in their resting bays, they have humans within 100 meters. Okay, so 83% of the daylight time when they're supposed to be resting, we have somebody around them within 100 meters. The average time between these exposure rates is less than 10 minutes. And again, I'm going to refer you back to my 7-year-old daughter. If she comes back within 10 minutes again, I haven't gone into a deep sleep yet, right? So it's that kind of issue that these animals are being exposed to again and again at these high rates. So that's kind of the summary of all of Julian's work. Up until 2015, the preferred management approach was these time area closures. In 16-17, there was a change in the preferred management approach to a 50-yard no approach rule anywhere within 2 nautical miles of the coastline, which went out for public comment in 2016. So in summary of the findings, we know we have a relatively small number of animals. It's distinct stocks. They have this constrained behavioral repertoire. Bays are critical for rest. And within these resting bays, they have the highest exposure of human activity anywhere around the world. And we have had a recent change in the preferred management approach. And the 50-yard no approach rule is a good start. Let me start by saying this. It is a good start. However, management actions needs to be context specific, okay? And think about, again, back to my 7-year-old daughter. When she goes to school, I don't want a car driving by at the same speed of 50 to 60 miles per hour that they do on a freeway as they do as she's walking into a school. The habitats where these animals are very different. There's things that are areas that are more important, and these resting bays are more important. My argument is I think we should be reconsidering within these bays that they have a higher value for these animals than the areas outside, and a management approach should certainly take these things into account. Another thing, the 50-yard rule does not take acoustics or vessel noise into account, right? So right now we can't approach within 50 yards. Acoustics, and I'm going to Aaron, I'm going to apologize already on my acoustic knowledge here, but acoustics certainly, sound of vessels certainly propagate much further than 50 yards. There's a paper out by Franz Jensen about 5-6 years ago that looked at 2-stroke and 4-stroke engines in a shallow water environment, and he simply took the vessel and drove at 2 knots, 5 knots, 10 knots at different distances, and knowing the source levels and communication ranges of bottlenose dolphins, he showed that if you're going at, so let's take an example, let's say 10 knots, you're going at 10 knots and you're 100 meters away, you decrease their communication, their active communication space by 85%. This is just an example. My point is that 50 yards might be okay acoustically for a kayak or a swimmer, but vessels will certainly have a much bigger impact than 50 yards that are being proposed. Another part of this study showed that gear shifts have produced very loud sound sources. Gear shifts produce sound sources of peak-to-peak sources of up to 200 dB, which travels many hundreds of meters and up to kilometers. Okay. So again, I do think that the 50-yard approach rule is a good start, and certainly outside the bays, I do think it's a good start. But I think inside the bays, I think we need to, now that we still, this rule hasn't been implemented yet, we have some time to really think about this and jig this a little bit more, particularly in these very, very important bays. So I recommend that we revisit particularly the management approach within these resting bays. 2 other things that are really important. The international community, the scientific community, has also acknowledged the importance of these spinner bays. The IUCN has a task force that evaluates data that are produced by scientists and others. There was a case put forward to designate these 4 resting bays at what's called as an IMA, Important Marine Mammal Area, under the IUCN task force. And an IMA is defined as the discrete proportions of habitat important to marine mammal species that have the potential to be delineated and managed for conservation, and consist of areas that may be merit place-based protection and monitoring. So this goes through a peer review process once the data is submitted, and then it's whether it's acknowledged as an IMA or not. And certainly these 4 bays have been acknowledged internationally as IMAs, important areas. Lastly, since the proposed ruling went out in 2016, the state governor, Governor Ige, initiated what's called the 30 by 30 initiative, which is to effectively manage 30% of Hawaii's nearshore waters by the year 2030. This suggestion speaks very, very well into what the state is already suggesting to do with nearshore waters. So we have state background and rationale for this. We have international support for this. And what I'm suggesting here is not a radical suggestion, okay? Until recently, the time area closures were the preferred option. The areas are not large. They're the sizes of a few football fields. Think about it. Few football fields we're talking about here, right? We have seemingly an opportunity to work with state legislation under the governor's 30 by 30 initiative. And also, very importantly, time area closures in these restricted football field sized areas are very easy to evaluate compliance and to enforce, unlike, or more easy than a 50-yard rule, I would say. I guess just one last word I would say is that whatever rule that goes forward, make sure that whatever monitoring that you're going to put in place, that you can actually monitor it effectively. You want to see if it can actually be, does your rule work or not? So have some predefined metrics that you want to really clearly test or not, because otherwise we're just monitoring to monitor, and I'm afraid that that's just going to put us back again. We've been grappling this for 25 years now. If we're going to make a ruling, let's make something that makes biological sense and preserves this industry that currently is over $100 million per year in Hawaiian waters. Thank you.
In the interest in staying on time, I'll just ask if there are any clarifying questions from the commission. If not, we'll take one question in the back. Please give your name and your affiliation. Use the mic, please, so the others not here can hear you.
My name is Claire. I live here in Honolulu. I like your talk. Appreciate it. I'm wondering, have you done any tests, because you talked about acoustics, and we know that there are tests on sonar, because there's talk about sonar, and we know what is happening to the whales, and we know that the Ninth Circuit Court stopped it, but it's still happening. And we know the tests are still out there now. I'm a traditional midwife, that they have now tested what's happening to children with ultrasound. So I'm wondering what you have done that, because we've got proposals now to start bombing off our coast.
Right.
And with military stuff, that's what I'm wondering. Have you studied the military impact also?
No, we have not.
What did you say?
I said no, that has not been the focus of our work.
And is anybody studying the military impact? I mean, we've got Kauai High building up now with more stuff. Is anybody studying it?
This may be a question that's more appropriate when we have the rest of the panel up
Yeah,
here.
I'm going to be going to a birth, so I don't have the time to do that. But so I'm just want it on record, and maybe you could answer that.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lars.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ann Garrett, the Assistant Regional Administrator for Protected Resources of NIPS. She's going to be speaking first about enhancing spinner dolphin protections through a Marine Mammal Protection Act rulemaking, and then about outreach and enforcement programs. And this is the final rule.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, commissioners and commission staff, for coming here to the Pacific Islands. If Aaron needs to apologize, I certainly need to apologize too. You're going to hear from me a couple times today and tomorrow. And some of my staff that would otherwise be here are actually in training, so I get the opportunity to spend some time with you. First, I'm going to talk about the rulemaking that we just did that Lars touched on and Aaron touched on as well. The purpose of the rulemaking is to enhance protections for Hawaii spinner dolphins to prevent disturbance, and our proposed regulations were published in August of 2016. We held 6 hearings around the state, 2 on Hawaii Island, 2 on Oahu, 1 on Kauai, and 1 on Maui. We received over 22,000 written comments and 145 oral testimonies on our proposed rule. Ultimately, in our review, over 2,000 comments were unique, with anywhere between 2,000 and 17,000 were duplicates or form letters. Our proposed regulations focused on approach, as Lars mentioned, or remaining within 50 yards of spinner dolphins by any means, prohibits swimming with spinner dolphins, prohibits the approach within 50 yards and interception or placing a vessel between the path of a dolphin or another object, which we call leapfrogging. The proposed regulation only applies within the 2 nautical miles of the main Hawaiian Islands and in designated waters bounded by Maui, Lanai, and Ko'olawi. We published a draft environmental impact statement, which we had 5 alternatives, and this is the map of the geographic scope of the proposed regulations. The proposed rule does have exceptions. Exceptions for vessels and swimmers approached by dolphins. We do recognize that they are very social creatures, and they may approach the vessels themselves. Purposefully, the exception does not provide for anyone to engage or pursue those animals. Also, vessels transiting to or from a port or harbor in a restricted channel that may be approached or occur within 50 yards will not be considered a violation of the rule. When safety of a person or a vessel is at stake is also an exception, and activities authorized by permit can be accepted. Government operations, such as federal, state, and local, when necessary to perform official duties, are also exceptions. Currently, we're still in the process of finalizing our rule. We have just recently completed our review of all the comments. The final rule is in review in the agency, and I suspect that will take several months. In the meantime, we're also, as Aaron mentioned, we are supporting research, passive acoustic monitoring for a pre-rule implementation, and we will be doing that after the rule is implemented. We have 6 sites for this monitoring on Oahu, 2 on Hawaii Island, and 1 on Maui and Lanai. The goal of that monitoring is to inform us on the occurrence of spinner dolphins in the bays and resting locations, as well as their residency time and how well the rule ultimately is working to protect those animals. We're also supporting our Science Center, Aaron, in conducting abundance estimates in the main Hawaiian Islands, and we're continuing, we have a large, pretty reasonably large effort to continue outreach and enforcement activities, and a number of partners that are helping us do that as well, and that continues to grow. That's it for my update on the rule. Would you like me to?
Why don't we go ahead and take clarifying questions from the commission first? Seeing none, are there any from the public? Or Aaron?
Yeah, thank you. In any of this discussion, was there consideration about putting speed restrictions on either approaching or departing vessels?
It was part of the EIS, but it is not in our preferred alternative. We did talk about it, yeah, and evaluate it. Get another one over here.
Aloha, my name is Cindy Freitas. I have a question about the EIS draft. Is there anything monitoring the occlusive frequency in there? There's nothing talking about the frequency that they're using.
The frequency of use
of the acoustic, yes.
Acoustic frequencies?
Yes.
No, we did not look at acoustics.
So is it in the EIS drafting?
No, I don't believe it is.
Why is it not? That's part of the issue here.
Our focus was on the interactions that have been occurring between vessels and the spinners, and acoustics was relegated to our headquarters office. They focus more on the acoustics issues. So we did not focus on that in any great detail.
So is there a speaker coming up on that part with the EIS draft on behalf of the acoustic?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Thank you.
I'm Elise Cepeda. I'm a captain for Coral Reef Snorkel Adventures. I saw one of the monitoring sites for the Big Island is Makako Bay, and I'm wondering if you guys have any plans to monitor other areas along the coast, because to my knowledge it's been almost 2 years now since the spinner dolphins have regularly frequented Makako Bay as a resting area.
That's probably a better question for Aaron or Lars.
Okay.
There is some monitoring that's going on the Big Island and Oahu, but I don't know the full details.
Okay, thank you.
Jensen, I have a quick question. You said it was in review and this will take several months. When, if all things go right, would a final rule perhaps be published?
Great question. That's difficult to predict, particularly as we moved across administrations, certain roles and actions that are not regulatorily required have slowed down in this administration. But with luck, by the end of the calendar year, we'll have a final rule.
Mike Tillman?
Yeah, I've been wondering about the choice of 50 yards. What was the rationale for that?
The 50 yards comes from our consideration of the science as well as the impacts, as well as consulting with our partners and looking at implementation. It's well defined in our EIS, but essentially it was a decision that the agency made to because it's consistent partly with the Dolphin Smart regulations, and we've seen it to be effective to some degree. It may, and then we're also hoping to do some monitoring to see if it is in fact effective. That was the original plan. We did consider closed areas, but got a lot of feedback from partners that that was not a preferred alternative.
I have a question regarding ARTARS. I'm associated with Ka'alua Beach Park, Reef Teach, and Keikaiola.
And your name and affiliation?
ARTARSA. I have a question about enforcement. What agency will be charged with enforcement? Who is funding the enforcement? And what are the penalties for violations?
I actually cover some of that in my next presentation. Enforcement is a joint effort between NOAA and the state. And as far as penalties, I don't have those in front of me. We do have our enforcement attorneys are here, and we could.
Can you, use a microphone for the folks on the webinar?
Dwayne Smith is our outgoing enforcement attorney, and Elizabeth O'Sullivan is incoming, so I appreciate that they're here to help clarify some of these questions.
I apologize, I didn't anticipate it. My name is Dwayne Smith. I'm the enforcement attorney in Pacific Island region, at least until Friday, which is Pauhana. Then I'll be the enforcement attorney in the Southeast region, and I get to play with bottlenose instead of spinners. So the max penalty under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, it varies with inflation. I don't remember off the top of my head what it is right now, but it's somewhere around $29,000 would be the max penalty. Realistically, someone wouldn't get the max penalty for a first-time violation. We do have a penalty policy. It's public. It's available on our website. I'd be happy to share that with folks. But if you just Google NOAA enforcement section, it'll bring you to our website, and you can see both the cases we've made and our penalty policy and the penalties that are available. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Dwayne.
If there are no other clarifying questions, there's one more. Okay. One more question, then we're going to move on.
So I was just watching the slide about
your name and affiliation.
Heather Reynolds, private citizen. Just watching the slides and seeing that the 11 cases that were listed of what was harming the dolphins in the human interaction, all of them were either fishing gear or debris entanglement. And my question, and then there were 2 swimmers who apparently tried to help them. And my concern is if swimmers aren't allowed to be within 50 yards of an animal, how will we know if they're entangled, and how would someone be able to help them?
Thanks for that question. We rely on reports in our health and stranding network, and actually under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, individuals that don't have authorization should not be helping animals like that. They should be reported, and in my next presentation I'll actually post the hotline number for you as well. But those that observe that type of incident, I highly recommend you report it to our hotline.
So I have the hotline, but how would we know that they were entangled if we couldn't be within 50 yards of them? I don't understand that. How would we know, how would anybody know? Oh, you can observe from that distance. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move into your next presentation.
All right, thank you. For my next presentation, I wanted to share with you some of the outreach, enforcement, and community engagement we've been doing over the years. As the rule has not been in place, there's been a number of other things we've been doing to help spinner dolphins. We have engaged in outreach with commercial operators as well as on the recreational side. So we've been working with tour operators for a number of years. More recently, particularly been working with the tourism industry to help them understand the issues around spinner dolphins. As far as recreational viewing, we've also done a lot of outreach on the beaches and in the bays, and we have worked with a number of outside partners. The list is growing. And we also have a growing social media presence where we're actually getting reports from people that are using social media to report concerns about the spinner dolphins. Recently, there's been an ocean users workshop with the sanctuary. And we also regularly engage in one-on-one meetings with operators. Recently, 5 on the Big Island, 11 on Oahu. And then we also I have staff that go out and do tour evaluations, so ride-alongs on commercial vessels. Some of which is inspired because they get pinged by enforcement, or others because they are interested in doing what is best for the dolphins, and we have a number of Dolphin Smart operators. Dolphin Smart is a program that was created in the Southeast. It's a voluntary program to promote responsible stewardship of dolphins and other marine wildlife. And it's meant to minimize adverse interactions. Operators engage in what we consider wildlife-friendly marketing and manage their customer expectations. They also participate in a number of education events. SMART stands for Stay Back 50 Yards, Move Away Cautiously if dolphins show signs of disturbance. A, always put your engine in neutral when the dolphins are near. R, refrain from feeding or touching or swimming with the dolphins. And T, teach others to be dolphin smart. The program was established in 2007 in Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary and focused largely on bottlenose dolphins. It's been expanded to other parts of the Southwest Florida and Alabama, and in Hawaii we adopted it in 2011. The founding partners for this program were NOAA Fisheries, the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and the Dolphin Ecology Project. Recognized operators voluntarily follow a set of criteria to demonstrate and support dolphin conservation. There are 19 recognized operators nationally and 5 in Hawaii. Proud supporters is another level of engagement for commercial operators, and these folks raise public awareness of the program and promote responsible viewing and advertising. Companies or organizations promote tours or support responsible viewing, and we have 66 proud supporters nationally and 13 in Hawaii. The future of Dolphin Smart is changing. We are looking here in Hawaii to build new and foster existing partnerships. One of which I mentioned earlier is the Hawaii Tourism Authority has been engaging with us more and more in the last couple years and working with us to communicate and messages to the greater tourism industry. And they've also created, the Ecotourism Associated created their own certificate program. These programs are focused on education and training, and they have online training modules and annual workshops on each island. So we're really happy about this particular partnership. It's helped us to stretch our time and the message farther. And it's more inclusive of any other stakeholders in the tourism industry. So we've got travel agencies, hotel concierges, airlines participating, and this has really allowed for the message to change, and we're seeing good response and look forward to that being even more effective tool. Recent outreach events that my staff have conducted. They've been engaged in the Global Tourism Summit and also World Oceans Day, International Save the Vaquita Day at the aquarium, and we've been doing multiple presentations and events at schools and universities just to get the message out about what these dolphins need. We have, as I mentioned, a number of really important outreach partnerships. We have a small set of resources in NOAA's Protected Resources Division, and so these folks is growing number of support, and we couldn't do it without them. So we've got the Hawaii Tourism Authority, the Hawaii Ecotourism Association, PONO at UH Manoa, a number of entities on the Big Island. We're going to have the Kama'aina United up here in the panel, and a number of others that are helping us throughout the state. We've also conducted a Knowledge Cafe at the IUCN Conservation Conference in 2016, which really brought together a lot of people from diverse interests on the subject. And we've been working with Protectors of Paradise and also working with the state to increase our messaging and our outreach. Importantly, we're also working very closely with our enforcement, and we're managing, as I mentioned before, what we've termed potential take incidents. Because of social media, we're getting a lot more reports and pictures of activities that our concerned citizens are sharing with us, and we are reviewing those reports and working with our enforcement folks to determine whether or not further action is necessary. Currently, we're receiving about 70 of these type of social media type reports annually, and it's a very collaborative process with our OLE. We're sort of the first evaluation, and then they do further evaluation of what's going on. I cannot stress enough that OLE, our Office of Law Enforcement, also does their own outreach. As Dwayne mentioned, it would be highly unusual for someone to be prosecuted with a first offense. We do a lot of education and outreach and warnings when it comes to interactions and activities that result in the harassment of marine mammals. The effort on enforcement is jointly managed with the state under a joint enforcement agreement, and we also support the Doe Care Academy and training for officers so that they understand the needs and requirements of the biology of animals like the spinner dolphin. A couple of recent enforcement actions that I'll just mention here. We had 2 tour operators that issued 3 total penalties. Operator on the Big Island in 2014, and on Oahu, 2 incidents for the same operator in 2016. We've also had some recreational swimmers issued penalties, and there was some monetary summary settlements from incidents in 2017. As I mentioned, OLE has issued multiple verbal warnings and written warnings, as well as conducted outreach on the issue, in addition to staff and the protected resources of NIMS. So some things that we know we need to still work on. We need to do more face-to-face outreach at resting bays. Sometimes it's just a matter of educating people. We have a lot of tourists that are from other countries that don't understand that these dolphins actually need the rest that Lars was talking about. And so we've done a lot more to overcome language barriers and work with people from a variety of places across the world because of the tourism industry here, and overcome some of those cultural differences. We're also looking at implementing grants for volunteer networks. However, presently, our funding is a little bit limited. We would like to build a grant network, much like we've done for some of our other marine mammals, like Hawaiian monk seals. We are in the process of sort of redesigning our Dolphin Smart program and continue to foster partnerships with the tourism associations and create trainings for these folks so that they better understand what they can do and how they can monitor themselves the behavior of the dolphins. We also, with our enforcement, have an increased presence on many of the islands. We've spent more time in vessels and doing ride-alongs with enforcement and monitoring what's going on, both with NOAA folks as well as partners. And Adam Kurtz couldn't be here today, so I did this presentation for him, but he is our Dolphin Smart coordinator. So his number is here. And as I said, our statewide hotline is up here. So if you see an animal in distress or entangled in a fishing line or what have you, this is the number to call. With that, I am done.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to hold questions till we get the rest of the panelists up here. Come on up and take seats. Mark and Damien, are you here? All right, we'll move forward with the folks that we have. Thank you all presenters for what you provided so far this morning. This will be a time when we can ask questions of the presenters and the other panelists up here, dealing with materials presented already or other questions you have about spinner dolphin biology and management. I'd like to first open up the questions. Well, first of all, I'd like to have the panelists introduce themselves and give their affiliation. We'll start down on the far end.
Hello, can you hear me? My name's Colin Cornforth. I've been operating off the Kona coast with Captain Zodiac since March of 2004. I've been a fisherman, commercial fisherman, spear fisherman, and really take to heart this issue of our interaction with our spinner dolphins.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Stack. I'm a researcher from Pacific Whale Foundation based on the island of Maui.
I think you've heard enough from me. I'm Ann Garrett.
Likewise, I'm Erin Olson.
You have a mic.
My name is Lars Bader, University of Hawaii.
Aloha, Luna Kikoa. I work with the Department of Land and Natural Resources in the Division of Aquatic Resources, and I was just recently in Division of Conservation and Resources Enforcement for the past 6 years. So a bridge between our managing and enforcement agency.
I'm Mark Lambers with the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary.
I'm Damien Kennison, resident of Ho'okena.
All right, thank you all very much for being willing to join us this morning. I'd like to first open up questions to the commissioners. And, okay, staff and CSA.
Yes, in listening to Lars's presentation, I got the impression, and if I'm wrong, tell me, that the 50-yard rule was, in his view, far from adequate, and he seems to champion the idea of time area closures with scientifically based reasons. And then Ann's presentation made it seem as though, and maybe, and again, if I'm wrong, tell me, but it doesn't seem like time area closures are on the table in the EIS or in any proposed ruling. Given the time it takes, it seems like time area closures as a concept, as an approach, is pretty much off the table for the foreseeable future. That seems to me a basic incompatibility, and I don't know, there seems to be a lot of momentum in the direction from your education and outreach presentation, and a lot of momentum toward facilitating or interacting with the industry, the watching industry and the swimming industry, to sort of make it possible for them to continue doing what they've been doing, but with this new set of measures that are going to be specifically centered around the 50-yard rule. I guess that's kind of a challenge to the whole group to figure out how that's going to be resolved. If it has, maybe it has been already, I don't know.
Anne, would you like to respond first?
Sure. I guess I'll just start with what the 50-yard is the proposed rule. The time area closures were considered as part of our evaluation and the NEPA document. It isn't what we proposed in the as a preferred alternative, but it is still under consideration because we haven't come to a final rule.
I'd just like to make a comment. And I took to heart what Lars said in terms of the importance of context with regards to this protection measure. And while a 50-yard rule may be just fine for bottlenose dolphins who are awake during the middle of the day and able to deal with the things that are happening to them around their environment, these animals are in deep rest, and they require that deep rest. And the idea that they can be approached like any other awake animal flies in the face of their biology, to my thinking. Daryl?
Yeah, if I heard correctly, some of Lars' concerns had to do with noise as a potential impact, and I've heard a number of people from the audience raise questions about noise, and yet this doesn't, again, seem to be part of the discussion, and perhaps we don't really have answers about what the impact of noise are. Anyone want to comment on that?
Lars?
I'm not an acoustician, but it's clear that if you have a vessel within just outside 50 yards, is clearly going to be audible for an animal, a marine mammal that's 50 yards away. If we're trying to come up with protective measures that have to be effective for the biology of these animals, we have to take the biology into account. My mind is that, again, I think the 50-yard approach, no approach rule, or no approach within 50 yards is good outside of these bays. And it does give some protection. But within these bays, I think it is very inadequate. And what I'm afraid of is that we've spent 25 years now trying to get a rule in place. If we put something in place now that we already know is biologically not sensible in these important habitats, are we going to spend another 25 years trying to get an updated rule while we know pressures are increasing? So if we're going to do something, let's do it right.
Other comments on that? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So I actually happen to be an acoustician or bioacoustician, so I can maybe speak to that a little bit. We know that the dolphins almost certainly hear the vessels that are around them, but we also know that they're not terribly sensitive at the lower frequencies. Their primary region of hearing sensitivity is that's much higher, focused on their frequency associated with echolocation. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to disentangle the effect of vessel presence and vessel noise, because you can't really take one without the other. And so while it's important to keep that in mind, we shouldn't assume automatically that noise, especially low frequency noise, is going to be an inherent disturbance to the animals. It may be, but we have to keep in mind that vessel presence alone may be enough of a factor that might be affecting their behavior.
Patty, then Sam, and then Francis.
Thank you, Randy. This, I think, is just maybe a clarifying question. The proposed rule is specifically for within 2 nautical miles of the coast. That's correct, and so really only applies to spinner dolphins in those waters. And what about approaches and interactions with spinners further offshore and/or with other species offshore? Are there any regulations related to swimming with these species further offshore?
I think that's for you, Anne.
From what we gathered in our review and putting together the proposed rule, and from the science that has been done, that the number of approaches out farther than the 2 nautical miles was quite far and few between. And the 2 nautical miles was meant to capture the bulk of the interactions.
Sam?
Thanks, Randy. Sam Simmons, Scientific Program Director with the Commission. Lars, maybe you're the best one to answer this. What do we know about the pelagic foraging offshore these dolphins do in terms of the changes that Jeff talked about this morning? Are things going to get better for them, worse for them, or do we just not know?
Yeah, Sam, I don't think we know, right? We certainly know that they forage on the deep scattering layer that comes up. At what cascadal effect and how these different changes might affect those is the key question for prey availability.
Francis.
So I wanted to maybe sort of build on Randy's comments, and obviously this is a complicated issue. We've got a panel of people from various backgrounds, expertise. It's been a 25-year-long issue that's been discussed. We've actually heard about it at multiple commission meetings. So the answer is not simple, and clearly I'm not a dolphin expert or an acoustician. So I'm still struggling with this basic sort of dichotomy of some recommendations about time and space use restrictions versus distance. And we probably will never know the answer. So in sort of my mind as a sort of vet training, you try a treatment, and if the treatment works, you continue it, and if the treatment doesn't work, you dismiss it. But to do that, you need data. So what seems to me difficult is we don't really know what the impact of these actions will be. We have these relatively crude measures of abundance with methods that have changed over time. We have movements, but we certainly don't know how they behave, like subtle things like, how Lars's personality has changed with his daughter's nocturnal activities. We don't know about that for dolphins. So some of the tension seems to me that what is really the impact on the dolphins at an individual level? And I can't see how, to me, how would you get at that with a 50-meter approach rule, which will be hard to evaluate the efficacy of? I mean, how, apart from enforcing it, even to get enough data on how it was being met will be challenging. I mean, will there be people out recording how far boats are from dolphins every day? Probably not. And yet, with a time closure study, you could do that. You could have observations that would say, yes, this area wasn't used. And then 5 years from now, you could look at impacts and changes in dolphins. So without any sort of knowledge on what will really happen to the dolphins, just pragmatically, it's hard to envisage how the proposed rule could be evaluated in its efficacy 5 to 10 years from now versus a time and space restriction. So I don't know if, it'd be interesting to hear a couple of perspectives. I think from the scientist, you're yelling, yeah, that's how you collect data, but from perspective of people on the water, how you think they could be evaluated, how data could be collected on both the efficacy and on the dolphins. It's kind of a long, rambling question, come statement, come whatever.
Can I comment?
Sure, please.
I'm a resident of Ho'okeno. I'm married to a lineal descendant of Ho'okeno Kawako. I speak for the Alani and Kaleohano families. I cannot speak for anybody else. I have a simple solution to all the miscommunication and misunderstanding on this issue. We volunteer to make Kawako Bay a pilot project to limit interaction with the dolphin, to study the impacts, minimum interaction, maybe no swimming with the dolphin. Just for our bay doesn't have a lot of people coming there. It's like Hononau and the other areas. So I think it would be a less invasive place for other stakeholders if we start to study it at Hokena and determine what the impact is on resting dolphins when they're left alone. Thank you.
Peter?
Yeah, I guess that sort of leads into my question, which just I'd really love to hear from the other members of the panel, sort of what's happening at the local and state level. You know, what are the sort of, let's say, softer alternatives than regulatory? Are there things that are working or not working? Are there ways that things are being controlled that you guys are seeing sort of below the federal, regulatory level?
Who'd like to start? Yes.
Well, I also represent our nonprofit community organization, Kupa, Friends of Hokena Beach Park, and we're working on alternatives to appropriate tourism. We're working with the Hawaii Tourism Authority. We met with them last month. We talked with Precious Evalos and Kalani Ka'anana, the cultural specialists. We talked about our traditions, our history, our families, so they can get a good understanding and our challenges of what is possible as far as providing alternatives to swimming with the dolphin. So we're working closely with Department of Aquatic Resources to develop a management plan to hanai our opelokoa, which means traditional management, and we're trying to bridge, make all these bridges with all these organizations. We're working with a lot of NGOs and county and state and OHA, state organizations to provide alternatives for viewing for a pono viewing of the dolphin. So again, I reiterate my offer to consider Kawako as a pilot project to determine what the impact of no disturbance to the Naya is. As a canoe fisherman for 40 years, we've never disturbed the dolphin. We've never swam with the dolphin. The whales used to come into our bay, but since all the activity is going on, they do not come into our bay anymore. They come to Hokena to give birth and nurse their young. They're not doing that anymore. The whales traditionally considered to provide the ohua, the baby manini that come to the shoreline and gather in the tide pools. We don't see that anymore. I don't know what the relationship between that and the increased activity in the bay is, but there must be some way to determine that. We asked the researchers for help to determine what the relationship between the Naya, the Opelo, the Akule, and the humans are, so we can develop a management plan that's appropriate for everyone.
It'd be good to get a perspective from some of the operators, perhaps. Oh, first of all, Luna?
So I'll follow up with Uncle Damien. So I was working in enforcement as their outreach coordinator. I didn't have any enforcement authority. There were some folks in Ho'okena there was conflicts down there about people being harassed while they were swimming with dolphins and people wanting to stop them. And so I'm not enforcement, so I called in DoCare and I was like, hey, we're having some issues down in Ho'okena. Can you guys come down and like help us? So we met with them and they're like, we can figure this out. Like they said, they did like a joint operation with NOAA. So DoCare showed up with NOAA and they went down there and they provided outreach and education with the folks. And I've been working with Uncle Damien and them. So it's trying to just get that state level since we're here and building that relationship with the enforcement officers. The thing that we need to build is, like they said, they come and train our DoCare officers for the academy. So our enforcement officers at the state level know who is their federal partners at that level. So when they're doing something, they can coordinate. It's about making those relationships like with the community and from the community to the state and the state to the federal. So that's kind of the realm I've been working in, trying to build those relationships and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Colin?
As an operator off the coastline here, obviously I see it daily. There are a tremendous amount of people that are working out there that their hearts, their minds are in the right area, but have failed to have leadership from you guys to know where to go forward. You know, our tourism economy here is a mainstay for how many people within this room can pay their rent. And I think a lot of us truly want to protect the animals. We want to figure out a way. But you need some leadership from some of us in the community to be able to advocate this way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right.
If you have a comment, please come to the microphone. Okay, this gentleman, then David.
My name is Rick Wilson. I'm a 50-year user of the ocean here in the islands. I've been a commercial diver. First of all, I would like to suggest to each of you that are in here or here today or for these 3 days, go down to Kailua Bay at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning and watch what happens. It's absurd. We will have between 10 and 15 tour boats in the bay following the dolphins. They surround them. I live right above Lyman's. I watch every day the boats just harassing the hell out of the dolphins. My point is, at what point in time are you going to kill the resource? I don't mean physically kill it, but you're trying to manage a resource. We can't go up into the forest and chop down all the koa trees. Why should people be allowed, in the name of tourism and making money, to go out and do this? The comment that was made about our numbers don't really reflect how many dolphins they are. But I think the idea is that if we continue to harass the dolphins, keep them from resting, that at some point in time the population is probably going to start declining. At what point, whether it's 15 years from now or 50 years from now, do you turn around and say, oh my God, we made a mistake. The dolphin populations have crashed, and what are we going to do? If you don't understand what's going on here, go down to the bay and look. And with all due respect, I see you guys running your boats out there, 2 or 3, all the time, and surrounding, putting people into the water. It's like a free-for-all. It's almost as bad as out here at night with the manta rays. There will be between 15 and 20 boats watching the manta rays. My comment to you, and I'm sorry I'm taking so much time, my comment is,
You need to get this under control. It's not happening. It's a joke that it's been going on for 25 years. Come on. Thank you.
Rick, I'd like to say as an operator, that's why I'm sitting here today, is to help everyone. After 25 years, I've had numerous complaints for the company that I've worked for. And under management, we as a company ended up swimming with dolphins. Started that about 5 or 6 years ago, after 20 plus years here in Kona where we didn't do that. Because if you can't beat them, join them, right? So how do we scale that back and try to figure out how to move forward, like you said, to have sustainability? And I think this panel and everyone here bringing together the science, but the community voice is huge. I swim down at the Ironman course 3-4 days a week, all right? I'm watching the boats coming in and out, but I'm also advocating with all of the swimmers that I'm with all the time of what's ethical, what's moral. It's a really difficult subject because there's this level of entitlement that goes on from one side of the community and to the other. So that's why we're looking to the leadership here to be able to go on.
Anne, do you want to respond at all to this, or should we go on to other questions? Okay, David Laced.
David Lace, private citizen. I just wanted to follow up on Francis and Randy's comments. And situation you know very well, manatees in Florida. I'm sure some people might think that dolphins are smarter than manatees. But they established a number of sanctuaries to protect animals or manatees from human disturbance. And you can go down to Florida in the wintertime and look at some of these sanctuaries that are literally roped off with some of them are maybe the size of that end of the audience. There's a rope that goes across, and there'll be 50 people over there, 50 manatees over there, and none over here. They learn very quickly to use these areas. They realize that people are not allowed in there. You can watch the people on one side and the manatees on the other side, and they're separated by about this much. And I think that that time area closure approach, I can't think of any, maybe Randy knows of some relative to cetaceans, but with manatees it works very well, and you can learn within a year or two whether the animals are going to recognize that this is an area they're not going to be approached, and you can do the monitoring that Francis was mentioning and determine very quickly whether this is an effective approach, and a lot quicker than you'll learn from 50-yard approach rule, which will be very difficult to enforce and very difficult for people to follow. That's my comment.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So she was here first, I believe, and then.
Aloha. I'm Cindy, and I have a kapuna in the back of you right now, slapping me over the head. He mele komo a he mele aloha no nā kupuna I ka au I hala aloha mai kako. I want to know, define an spiritual retreat. You had it on your introduction. Can you please define or clarify spiritual retreat?
We're just borrowing from the terms that others have adopted for the activities that they engage in.
You borrowing a term that you do not understand the definition of?
I didn't say I don't understand it.
I'm asking for clarification. Spiritual retreat. What is this clarification in your guys, whatever you heard from whoever, what is the clarification? Because I have clarification.
There are entities on the islands, in the islands, that do engage with the dolphins, and they consider themselves having a spiritual relationship with the dolphins. And
So-
that's in reference to that.
So out of all this, spiritual retreat can also be considered as cultural practitioners. I am a cultural practitioner. Whether it's on the land or the ocean, there are my amakus, the Naya, and I feel very hurt today. 25 years later, I think tourism weighs heavy here for the money and not for our animals, is what I'm hearing. I am very hurt. I have to hear it in the back from my kupuna right now. I'm a spiritual person, and she's slapping me right now. Spiritual has to be within the person, rather more so a DNA product. I am a descendant of that. 1775. I come from the lineage. And I agree with Uncle Damien. A pilot program, as simple as that. You guys need to learn and hear the people of the land of Moku o Keawe, which is this land, born and raised, who has the DNA many, many years ago passed down from the koko, which is the blood. We have insights. We have things that come to us, like now, it's coming to me. My kupuna, I have to acknowledge them right now. I should have acknowledged them earlier. Ikalamai, na kupuna. I am getting scoldings right now from them. I need to stand up and set the record straight here. Aole, tourism weighs heavy. Money weighs heavy right now. 25 years later, we're still sitting on the same topic? Shame on you guys. Shame on you. Aole hike. Learn from the people of the land. Uncle Damien had a perfect solution. Learn. We're trying to bridge with the people. We're trying to make pono with the people. Other people who's not of this land, who's not of the culture. But we aloha them too. We'll give them our knowledge. As secret as it is, we can only let out so much. But shame on you guys. And I'm sorry, not to offend anybody, but the topic I'm hearing, aole hike, aole. 2, what happened to the Good Samaritan who can help our creatures? No different than somebody getting banged on the road. We're going to help them because of the love we have, the aloha we have. We are not going to stand by using hotline in an animal market. We there, we can help them. Put that in part of you guys' system, in the rule. Good Samaritan. Some of us has the ike, the idea that we learn, even the people who doesn't have the koko, has that knowledge. You're going to help. You're going to help. They don't have to be two-legged people either. They are breathing people. They're breeding animals. They live the life that we all have to live in. Breathe, sleep, eat off of the earth. They are no different than us. None of the animals that comes from the ocean or the sea or the land. So please, put in your ike, your mind, with all the degree you guys get, we shouldn't be discussing this right now. You guys got higher education. You guys got higher whatever, money to go and do all this research. When the bottom line is coming from Ho'okena community. They're saving their community. They're saving their animals. They're saving their land and their life and their identity. What are you doing? No offense to anyone. Mahalo.
Thank you for your comments.
I really appreciate your comments, and I think Colin said it really well. It's an issue that NOAA cannot manage by itself. It takes leadership from the community, from the state, and a number of organizations, and I'm sitting up here with some great organizations that have worked on it. It's complex, as Francis said. It's difficult. And a regulation isn't necessarily the right tool, but it's a tool to aid in the conservation. Some of the other things we're doing that are important, because the Marine Mammal Protection Act has its limitations, we're also engaging in the research and trying to enhance our understanding of the numbers and the effects and what's going on in the long-term trends. And that's critical information to understand what's really going on. So we're working closely with our Science Center and all the researchers up here too. But we can't do it alone. We just absolutely cannot.
Okay, thanks, Ann. We have got 4 people at this microphone. Go ahead.
Kalamai. Aloha. My name is Kealoha Pishoda. I'm here on behalf of Kaipalawa, and also I'm a member of the Kia'i Kanaloa, an island-wide network of Native Hawaiian practitioners in support of the Kanaloa, who we loosely term Kanaloa, but that's the name of cetaceans. All from the chant of creation, we learn all things that were born of the sea, but breathe the air and give birth to their live young, are the Kanaloa, and also belong to the god of the sea, Kanaloa. I did submit, I'll just speak on a couple of things. I did submit extensive testimony regarding this. I just want to bring it forth here. I want to also acknowledge that we also support Uncle Damien in their pilot project. I think what is often missing is the traditional science, the traditional knowledge that has gone on for millennia relating to our Kanaloa, that can become a tool for management of resources. And I'm making like this because we don't consider the Kanaloa a resource, they're a source. Because in the taxonomy of our creation, they came before us and therefore gave birth to us. So they're our elder sibling. And that's how we see them. I agree wholeheartedly that impact of tourists that Auntie Cindy was referring to, Cindy Freitas, was speaking to, weighs very heavy, very heavy. For example, Kaipalawa, we do our own education, and it's a little program we call the Nana Ho'olohe, watch and listen. If you're going to go to swim with the Nai'a, you need to know when they're awake and when they're sleeping, because most people don't know that. So increasing education on any level and all levels is very important. But we also have been trying to encourage the idea of controlling the humans in the situation more, like using tethers, for example, in some of these key bays where the humans must be on the tether. I'm sorry, do you understand? Like, because, okay, but then it becomes complicated, because then there's practitioners who are practicing, and there's regular residents who live here, and they don't need to be on the tether, you know what I'm saying? They're swimming, or they're doing something in the ocean. But if it's tourism, they just want the photo of the Nai'a. They go on the tether and hold on, and they will swim by you. Anyways, we're trying to find balance, right? But I think sometimes that enforcement and the criminalization of the people becomes excessive. So we strongly recommend that you work with the practitioner groups in the community to find solutions, and even traditional ones as well, as quote-unquote scientific ones. You know, 1,000 years of observation, as Uncle Paco would say, is greater than, you know, a few data points. So we offer our services also to this body to kokua and help. And I want to also add one more thing, that the big elephant in the room here is twofold. One is that the sonar is not being factored in, and that is a huge impact, maybe outside when they're feeding, maybe even inside. We will submit to you folks a Section 106 consultation that we conducted with NOAA, and that the Navy has not followed up on. But that's also the elephant in the room, because federal law has to be adhered to. So we're not asking to trigger it here, but we did trigger it for the Navy sonar. But just so you know, the Navy has not completed that or finished it, and they just sort of blew us off, actually. But we're going to submit that report here, and our recommendations that we submitted to NOAA as well. Mahalo. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, your comments harken back to what we heard earlier today. These animals don't get to choose which management challenge they're going to face at any given time. They have to deal with cumulative and continuous threats, and it's good to keep that in mind. We have 4 more speakers over here and then one over here.
Hi, my name's Beth Goodwin, and just from the general public here. First of all, I do think this meeting is very important. It's good to have the scientists, the panels, the educated, the PhDs, the researchers, and the cultural people, the people that live here, and then even probably the tourists that are from out of town that wonder what's going on. So it's a great meeting. I appreciate everybody gathering together here to have this and to speak. What I was going to say was actually pretty much just got addressed a little bit by these two here, just a minute ago, these two aunties. And I used to be run a whale watching guide out of North Kohala, where we did snorkel charters, and we saw, you know, guaranteed to see humpback whales, and hopefully we would see dolphins. But part of my education, I'm also a marine biologist, and I also do know when the dolphins are sleeping, and I do know when they're resting. And I made a huge point of not approaching dolphins, never letting anybody get in the water with dolphins, and educating about what they were doing. An example that I like to use was dolphins are nomadic, like a group of nomadic tribal people living somewhere off the ground. And during the day, they're resting, but they all have to go out at night and feed. And when they go out at night at feed, if the female is about to give birth to a calf and she's out there and didn't get rest, that calf's going to get eaten by a lion or a shark. If you have a teenager that's during the day running around, not resting because they're being teenagers, go out at night, they're going to trail behind the school of dolphins and get eaten. But let's say during the day, you're resting and a 747 airplane comes in and drops off an entire airplane of people to swim around with you. There goes an airplane by the cow-calf that's nursing. There goes an airplane by the grandma that's helping the grandpa who's got Alzheimer's. Anyway, they're not resting. And it could be and would be very detrimental once they go offshore and they're not getting rested. Everybody knows that. What I found is that our customers loved that I was teaching them about the behavior. They wanted to come back out on our whale watching boat to learn more. They were like, oh wow, I'm going to tell my friends they shouldn't go out tomorrow with that Swim with Dolphin program because they're hurting them, that kind of stuff. And they loved it. And I think that kind of education that everybody's trying to do here is very important. It is true, the dolphins were here before the island erupted. Then the island erupted, then there was coral, then there was people, then there was all of us. So it is important to protect Malamanaya. But it is a very complex situation that everybody in this room is trying to help figure out. And I was sitting here thinking before they got up, and she said it, because I also know that dolphins will come to you and swim with you. I've been out there just minding my own business, and there they come around, and it's really cool when they do that. And I get that tourism needs to rely on that to a degree, but if they could do it by educating, like you're all proposing. But maybe if the boat was moored, and the people got in the water with a tether to the boat, and if the dolphins came over to the moored boat, yay, they got to swim with dolphins. If they didn't, oh well, they weren't, you know, because they can come right to you anytime they want. They can leave anytime they want. We know that they like to be at the harbor, at Honokeha Harbor, and when the boats are going in and out. You can't hardly avoid them. You have to like move away to get away from them. I'm just sort of proposing, this is a great meeting, a lot of good ideas, keep everybody involved, but maybe it's some way that more rules or suggestions or regulations, it does have to be regulated, because otherwise it is a free-for-all. So anyway, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Does anyone on the panel wish to respond to the last couple of speakers?
I just wanted to say the issue of tethering the swimmers has come up a couple of times now, and there is some precedent to that. I'm doing some research on swimming with large baleen whales in East Australia right now, and the regulation in the area that I'm studying is that the passengers must hold onto a line at all times when they're in the water. They're not really allowed to free swim. And so if we wanted to pursue that as a regulation, you'd still need to do research on the impact of that activity. You can't just assume there would be no impact because they're not actively swimming.
Thank you.
Hello again, Emily Cepeda. I'm a captain with Coral Reef Snorkel Adventures. I've been working in the industry here in Kona for 7 years, and prior to that, I studied at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, and I met Kealoha there working with the Hawaii Cetacean Rehabilitation Facility and the Hilo Marine Mammal Response Network. So I do have, I guess, the honor of having some background experience with the marine biology and the knowledge of how to determine when the dolphins are sleeping or when they're active, and I can share that with my customers. But what we see from our perspective in the industry, the vast majority of people working in the industry have no idea what they're looking at. All they know is it's a dolphin, it's exciting. Everybody turns into a 5-year-old girl when they see the dolphins. All rational thought goes out the window. They don't listen to rules. They don't listen to the regulations. It's a free-for-all, like has been said many times in the water. And I agree with what was said earlier, the gentleman speaking about what happens in Kailua Bay. It is chaos. And I know a few of the boats were out yesterday on the water with some of the commissioners looking at the dolphin experience in Kailua Bay. That was a really mild day. I was there driving the boat. At the worst, I've seen 28 boats with about 12 dolphins in Kailua Bay. I know specific tours guarantee a dolphin interaction, and they're taking 30, 40, 50, even 60 people, some of these new big double-decker boats, dropping them all in the water with one swim guide, which obviously is a safety concern for the people and the animals as well. A few of my concerns, specifically to the 2 nautical mile zone, within shore, I have a feeling what would happen if this is enforced, the tour operators who are guaranteeing a dolphin interaction are going to go 2 nautical miles offshore and find spotted dolphins and start dropping their people in the water with spotted dolphins or rough-toothed dolphins. Or they'll be cruising up and down the coast trying to find bottlenose dolphins. Any sort of dolphin other than a spinner dolphin, because they've guaranteed their customers that they're going to swim with a spinner dolphin. Personally, the company that I work for, we're a 6-pack, so we take 6 customers at a time. I'm on pretty much all of the morning charters that run, and I tell our customers specifically, also when they book, we do not guarantee a dolphin interaction. we have about 99% success rate seeing them from the boat, and we tell them specifically, we can't guarantee you're going to see them in the water. The dolphins make the decisions. We try 2 drops with the animals. If the dolphins don't come to us, we pull the plug, we get our customers back on board, and we go do something else. So we try really, really hard to make that sort of connection apparent to the customers when they book with us, that we're not chasing, harassing, we're not exploiting the animals, we're not doing everything possible to get them in the water with the animals, but I feel like we're one of the only operators that does that. And so we're 6 paying customers at a time, not that big of an impact compared to some other operators, which I won't name specifically, but if you're in the industry, you know who they are. I mean, they're dropping 60 people in the water at a time. There are other tour operators that are launching at 7 a.m. and running back-to-back tours until 2 p.m., putting people in the water with the dolphins. They don't have a swim guide. They usually don't give their customers fins. They just drop them in the water, and they're going back and forth, Honokahau to Kailua Bay, well after we know the dolphins are resting, like 10, 11 a.m. You know, they're running until 2 p.m., and the dolphins never get a break from these specific operators. And so my next biggest concern, or question really at this point, is what sort of incentive would you propose or be willing to offer to commercial operators to participate in the Dolphin Smart program, which is a volunteer program, as I understand. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, money talks. So do you have any proposed ideas to get all of these commercial operators more involved with the Dolphin Smart program? Because the way I see it, having been in the industry for so long now, nobody's going to change their behavior if it's like a volunteer program, the Dolphin Smart thing. Like, you have to provide financial compensation for these people who really want to change what they're doing.
Ann, would you like to comment?
Well, I'll start with the financial compensation. The federal government is, and our program is not in a position to provide financial compensation to individuals that participate. However, what we do is provide, the Dolphin Smart operators get to fly a unique flag to, and use the logos and information in their advertisements so that they are identified easily by customers, that they have knowledge of dolphin behavior and know how they should be operating around them. We're looking at revamping that program a little bit and hoping to engage more people in that program, but there's a number of minor type of incentives that way. And working with the Hawaii Tourism Association and others to really promote that, so that when they tourists actually look for those flags and look for those emblems when they do want to go out on a dolphin viewing adventure. But also, the proposed regulation was the other tier to that aspect, and really dealing with some of enhancing our regulations. I want to make it clear that harassing dolphins at any time is already illegal under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So our enforcement has been busy, as have we, related to that. So the rule is just meant to enhance that folks' understanding of what's required, and to clarify what we think is going to help the dolphins more.
So my other question added on to that is, how on earth are you guys going to enforce this? Because as I know of right now, there are 57 companies that actively do dolphin snorkeling tours along the Kona coast. And there just aren't enough people to enforce this or regulate this. So it's just going to keep going how it's going until something horrible and awful happens. Because like you said, it's already illegal. But you know, we see the Coast Guard come out every now and then. We'll see the DLNR come out on one of their boats or the jet skis. They'll come around, they'll watch people. I've heard that they take pictures sometimes. They, to my extent, or to my knowledge, they will board some vessels to check that we have the proper safety equipment. I've heard, it hasn't happened to me personally, but I've heard other operators receive verbal warnings or written warnings about having their dive flag up at the appropriate time, or having their snorkelers too far away from their dive flag. But to my knowledge, that's the only sort of enforcement that's happened regarding this. I know of one vessel up in the Puako area that was ticketed for actively harassing the spinner dolphins. I think it was mentioned in the, your presentation, it was in 2017. But other than that, the DLNR comes out and they look at us, they see what they're doing, and they don't do anything. And we hear some DLNR agents in the harbor later boasting about how they've never actually given tickets for what's going on. They give verbal warnings. And a lot of us are looking around pulling our hair out, like, why aren't you guys helping us? Like, we know that this is bad. We know that some companies are notoriously harassing, waking up the dolphins, leapfrogging, doing that. But nobody's enforcing anything right now.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, Davian, go ahead, and then Ann.
Well, you make a good point. I think you should support the new rules. The new rules have better deterrent to violating the laws. Right now, there's the financial fine for violating the Mammal Protection Act is not very, not enough of a deterrent for everyone to follow the rules. So if we all support the new rules and we all want the same thing, if everybody operates on the same level that you want to operate, you all can make money in an appropriate way.
Okay, Daryl Beness?
Can I make a quick comment?
Daryl first. He's my boss.
Yeah, thanks. What I'm hearing is from virtually all factions some sense of agreement that there's something needed here. And what I'm not hearing, and in this is someone to step up with and provide leadership to get us moving forward in a direction after the years of discussing this. It seems to me that it's a great opportunity for NOAA, for NIMS, to take advantage of what sounds like a similar interest from the various stakeholders to take a bolder action in this regulation rather than a more conservative one. And I just, seems to me, the things I'm hearing is something that involves some time, area closures, is likely to set up a situation where we can actually monitor and evaluate better. But it may be that you have multiple locations. You could do a number of different things with respect to perhaps intensity of enforcement in some areas, no involvement with industry in other areas, and perhaps less intense enforcement. And then you can actually start to measure and actually evaluate if various kinds of regulation are effective or not effective. So I just hope that you take advantage of a clear interest here. One last thing, at some point I'd like to hear about, from those who are knowledgeable about acoustic matters, the comments about sonar and whether that's likely to be an impact or not, if we know anything or don't know anything in that regard. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Sam Strindberg, and then Lars. Then we'll go back to the mics.
Samantha Strim with the Scientific Advisor with the Marine Mammal Commission. This is a question following up from Daryl's comment and what was said earlier about sort of experimental design, probably for Mr. Damien. Sort of in your mind, if you look at, in your experience, if you look at like a period of 24 hours, when would you think is the most important time to leave for the dolphins that they can rest? And also thinking about the type of design with the manatees, how big an area do you think should be set aside? So it's maybe two different things to think about, the timing and also the size of the area. Thank you.
If you measure how big Kawako Bay is, that would be a good determination for the area. They usually come in early in the morning to rest because they've been out working all night trying to feed their family. Yeah? So they come home, they want to rest, and people are waiting for them on the beach already. So, I mean, we can make areas where it's okay to swim when we determine what areas what their habitat is. You can GPS that area, set up buoys, and leave that area off limits to human interaction, except for us canoe fishermen who can transit outside of the area on the way to a fishing koa. But simply put, that would be the best way to determine what the impact is to have something like that instead of we have all the science and everything, but there's still everybody's still questioning the science. So let's get together our families, our cultural practitioners, our scientists, our researchers, and come to a solid plan to address this issue.
Follow-up question, Sam?
It was just, I know you said you spoke just for your community, but what is your general feeling about the number of other communities that would be willing to try different experiments, as Daryl suggested, different sizes, different timings to enforcement to see what works?
I understand your concern, Hawaiian perspective. You take care of the place where you live. You don't go any other place here. You take care of your place. You malama your aina. The aina feeds you. Now I cannot tell Napopo, Honana, or Minoli what to do, yeah? That's their kuleana. So I can only speak for us.
Okay. Point of order from the chairs. We're at the end of our session, but we still have some people who would like to ask questions. How much flexibility do we have?
If people are willing to shorten their lunch break, we have flexibility.
All in favor of shortening your lunch break? Okay, those of you who don't want to, bye-bye. Okay, Lars had a comment, and then we'll go back to the microphone.
I was a bit nervous coming here today about where this was going to go. I'm really encouraged, actually, to hear that we all have a common sense that we need to work together and we need more protection on these animals. Is that safe to say? Right? I think that's a big step, and I think that's a very good and strong basis. I think there are opportunities to work across some of the things that have been said today. Damon's made some good suggestions in regards to community watch, if you will, in the backyard at home. Something that we could maybe discuss or think about is that if it's a stage thing where if we are looking at protecting some habitats, maybe we don't suggest that we close all 4 bays. Maybe we say we close 2 bays, while other bays are worked on and managed by the local communities, and the bays that are chosen to be protected or closed from the traditional science perspective, that can be set up in a way that we can monitor the efficacy of exactly what we're trying to do, and in this way, I think we're upping. Someone said let's not be as conservative. We're upping it, and we're having different stakeholders with different areas of expertise to come and move this forward. So that to me is kind of where I'm hearing this is going.
Fair enough. Okay.
You okay?
And your name and
My name is Babette Gazarian Chernay. My family and I moved here 2 years ago from the Pacific Northwest, where we came from an island involved in the fate of the southern resident orcas, and we're here now working with volunteering to help the Hawaiian monk seal. It is mind-blowing to me when species are teetering on the brink of extinction that human fiscal considerations are still driving the agenda. I cannot fathom how much pushback there is from recreational boating, tour operators who claim they are providing an educational experience, commercial fishing, you name it. And as long as all of these industries can continue to have their thumb in the pie and draw from the same well, they're going to kill the golden goose, and there isn't going to be any dolphins to watch anymore or swim with. I think it is high time. The studies have been endlessly done. I'm encouraged by these new rules. I don't think they go far enough, but it's time for legislation and enforcement. It is time to start putting the health of the planet and the animals that have to survive there, make them human fiscal considerations subordinate to the health of what we're all feeding off of. And there are also oblique considerations that I didn't hear, like I'm wondering how the food stocks are. I too wonder why the maninis don't come into the tide pools, and how much work is being done on that. You know, if oblique human activity is depleting their food source, that's all part of the same equation. And I'm hearing kind of the same thing with the sonar. I'm hearing narrow focuses, which are good and they're necessary, but there is a bigger picture. And it's going to make some people mad to really do what has to be done to protect these animals and to protect the ecosystem and the lifestyle that we enjoy. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha. My name is Lanny Sinkin. I'm here at the request of Ali'inui Mo'i Edmund Silva to speak for the Kingdom of Hawaii. We find that your focus here and your discussion is productive and at the same time doesn't include the big picture as was just addressed. The NOAA has given permits, these are the exceptions that were referred to, has given permits to take millions of marine mammals during the Navy's exercises. RIMPAC comes here and blasts our water with sonar. And I've seen the turtles after that exercise with their flippers blown apart from the high intensity sonar. So if there's no research or education being done about high intensity radar, high intensity sonar, bombs, and all the rest of the military activities, you're really looking at a very small problem compared to the real problem. Climate change. Climate change sneaks into your agenda in one presenter, whereas it's a threat to civilization that threatens not only the animals in the ocean, but the animals on land, including us. So where is climate change in your agenda? Where's the military impact in your agenda? And I just want to share one spiritual story with you. When the Navy came here to test their low-frequency active sonar on the whales and dolphins during the breeding and birthing season for those animals, many of us stepped forward to oppose them. I took them to court. I sued them 5 times to drive them out of here. During the time I was suing the Navy, I went on a boat about 3 miles off the Hilo side, and we were out just cruising around, and here came a group of bottlenose dolphins, came and gathered around us. We went in the water with them. They formed a circle, and they were all going with their heads pointing in the same direction. And we were like, whoa, what's going on here? And here came 3 humpback whales, a mother, a consort, and a baby. And the adult whale surfaced beneath me, came up to within about 15 feet below me, and then swam out ahead of me, turned around and swam straight back at me, looked me in the eye, and passed his fluke over my head. And I understood that he understood that I was in court trying to stop the Navy from blasting them with this sonar. And it was a very profound experience that changed my life. It gave me a whole new respect for the consciousness of this planet. And these are the kind of things that don't get discussed. And one final point. The people who understand that the best are the indigenous people. And I don't see the indigenous people really represented in the Marine Mammal Commission. I happen to look at their website, who their staff is, who their executive officers are, who the members are. It seems like, I could be wrong, there's a missing component here And that's the indigenous people who need to be plugged into your deliberations to share wisdom that goes back thousands of years, not to a 2011 partial study of how many dolphins were in a given bay. They have a profound wisdom about these creatures and about life on this planet that all of us could benefit from. Thank you.
We have 4 minutes left and one, okay.
I'll go quick.
I just want to make it clear, Edmund Silva is not the king of Hawaii. I want everybody to know that, and I wish people would stop representing the Native Hawaiians, the indigenous people of this place. We can speak for ourselves. And one thing I learned through my many years of these meetings is nobody wants to hear your complaints. They want to hear solutions.
Thank you, and that's a really good note to end on. We've gone over time on this session. Vera, go ahead, and then.
I want to say something different. Thanks, Wendy. Vera Metcalf. I'm a Native Alaskan and a special advisor on this commission. It's not an easy role because I am the only Alaskan Native on the commission, but I wanted to just comment to Damien. In Alaska, we harvest a lot of marine mammals for our sustenance, and we look at the management system, and we often try to look at the spiritual aspect of these animals. So I think that's an important consideration. I'm glad you mentioned that oftentimes we lose the fact that these animals are very spiritual, like us, and we try to treat them. And in our management system, we are trying to incorporate indigenous knowledge and or traditional knowledge. And because we have a lot of young people who may tend to violate MMPA, and we often try to incorporate the spiritual value of these resources. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Very helpful. Thank you, Vera. I know there are people who wish to have additional questions and comments, but we truly are out of time. I encourage you to talk to the speakers individually once we finish here. I'd like to thank very much the speakers and the panelists and all the great questions we got from the audience today. We will resume at 1:45, and we'll be talking about monk seals starting at that time. Thank you all for coming.